Of March 17th, 2025. Members of the public are invited to attend in-person council meetings in council chambers at City Hall. Public access to tonight's meeting is also available on the city's YouTube channel online and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Leidy.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lukman Hiramasa.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Jaramillo.
Here.
Councilmember Kondo.
Here.
Councilmember Roper.
Here.
Councilmember Goff.
Here.
Councilmember Nowicki will be absent, and Councilmember Walker might also be absent.
Okay, we have 3 items tonight. The first one is Graffiti Management. Director of Public Works, Sarah Borgers, is here to present. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. And as soon as we get our PowerPoint up on the slides here. Awesome. So we're here to talk about graffiti management tonight. We have an opportunity to join with Adams County to do a more proactive approach to graffiti management. I do want to also say that we have a number of our Adams County Neighborhood Services folks here. Stacy Moslett, Katie Burchak, Gail Moon, and Ryan Dodge are here to help answer any questions, so I'm super happy to have them here. All right. So the purpose tonight, we're going to be presenting on an opportunity to enhance our existing graffiti removal program with the help of Adams County. So currently, our graffiti services are managed by Public Works. That's how it currently is, but it's one of those programs that has bounced around from department to department over the years. It tends to be whoever has a little bit of resources in the moment will address this issue. And so we're largely reactive to customer concerns, and we usually get these complaints in through CRM. Adams County has an existing graffiti program. They're wanting to take a regional approach at this, and they are actually already driving through North Glen in order to reach other parts of unincorporated Adams County and other partner municipalities. And so for them, it's an efficiency for them to be able to hit North Glen as they're doing their rounds around Adams County, so there's some efficiencies for them. They also say that as they do these proactive patrols, that over time graffiti decreases with time. If people paint and then it's repeatedly covered up, then they're less likely to do that again in the future. So what the IGA would propose is 40 hours per month of patrolling for the first 2 months. And then after that, 20 hours. And that's what the IGA proposes. What they actually see in real life is that it declines fairly rapidly. And so we may or may not need all of those hours. If we do need more time, city and county can jointly authorize that should we need it. I don't think they anticipate it, but you never know. Their normal operation is through April through October. That said, if the weather's nice, there's time and budget available. They do go 12 months a year. So this is a screenshot from their dashboard. You can see they've got partner agencies currently. They're in Westminster, Federal Heights, and Brighton. These are where they've proactively hit graffiti up till this point. I took this screenshot in late February. So they've already done quite a bit of work across Adams County. So you can go on their website and you can see this and click around on things and zoom in, and it's kind of fun to play with. So Adams County Graffiti Program would operate fairly similarly to the city's current program. They do require a waiver from private property owners before they paint graffiti on their property. The county would not be obligated to match colors. However, having spoken with Ryan a few times here, that's something that he really prides himself in, is finding good color matches for things. It helps prevent future graffiti. Normal operation, 8 a.m. to 4:30, Monday through Friday, except holidays. And the IGA calls out 5 business day response time based on how excited they are and how dedicated they are, I'm going to guess that number is less than that, but 5 days is what's in the IGA. The cost of this, so it would be a monthly billing. They charge $36.75 an hour. Subsequent years would be a 5% increase. And so the 2025 estimated cost would be $6,600 or so. This is for April through October, and additional services would be an additional cost. I think it's important to say here that this is not, they don't make any money off of this program. This is purely just their cost that they would pass on to the city. As I mentioned, Westminster, Brighton, and Federal Heights are already participating in the program. We have talked to all 3 of them, and they have shared positive reviews. So they've really appreciated having this service. And staff would continue to be here to support. So if there was ever a need that Adams County wasn't available or something was going on, our staff would continue to be available to support Adams County. And our CRM system would operate the same as it does currently. Staff would receive those CRMs and pass those straight on to Adams County. And that's the gist of it. We're happy to take questions.
Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this is a great idea to realize some synergies. Just a few questions. I've frequently reported graffiti, as you may know. So the graffiti gets painted on all kinds of stuff, whether it's wood fences, even on our concrete pathways, even on the 107th pedestrian overpass. So are there any limitations as to what they can remediate?
I'm going to let Adams County answer that, if that's okay.
Hi, thank you for having us tonight. We can get anything except we don't go up on the roofs. So from spray paint, different chemicals, power washer, and roll paint, we can hit pretty much anything. And with existing waivers, we already do RTD. We already do all the utility companies, the dumpster companies, they all provide us the paint, so it's all matching, and there's no cost to the county for that. So over the years, we've grown to where there's not a lot we can't do, and on top of that, our ways to get rid of it grow as well. It just varies on, like you said, where it is, how big it is, the time of year. It's harder to power wash during the winter.
So it begs a follow-up question for me. I forget if the mural in the underpass that goes over to our park and ride, that's gone, right? Okay. But let's say hypothetically somebody does tag a mural. How do you address or treat that sort of situation?
If it's on private property and they want it there and it's not offensive and the city was okay with it, you could leave it. Westminster has a neighborhood that's full of really cool murals like that. If it's on a park wall or something like that and it's not supposed to be there, then it gets covered.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else?
Goff?
Yeah, this is just maybe a minor question, but when I was first looking through this, I was a little puzzled because on the memo, I guess you call it, let me see what it says at the top. Yeah, the memo, it says there's no impacts to time or budget, but then you just went through and mentioned what that was. So I'm just a little confused about the.
That is an excellent call. So the presentation, there's no impact to time or budget for tonight. If council would like to move forward with it, then the memo in coming week, probably next week, but in coming weeks would address the budget issue.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, I didn't want to, be too picky about it, but I was just curious if we were saving money by having Adams County do this in some way.
I would hate to say we're saving money. I could probably do some math and figure out.
I can speak to that a little. So I can tell you similar size cities that we have then approached this regionally. Generally, you're going to end up sitting at around $68 a cleanup when you're doing it yourself. When we are approaching it from a regional approach, we're down to between $11 and $15 a cleanup, just because we're, using economies of scale to bring that down across the county.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Jaramillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I myself, I'm a muralist, so I understand how it is when our murals are tagged. Denver Arts and Venues, whenever my murals are tagged, they contact me directly, and they let me know because each mural that we have commissioned, we have to have a mural shield that's applied to it. So it's like a sacrificial layer. So when you clean up, sometimes that it will go through, and then you'd have to like do some mural restoration work, which maybe we go down that path, but luckily we have the vinyl wraps like on that we have, so those are like easy, you just wipe them. So I'm glad that we have thought of that proactively. But one thing that stood out, I know in the summertime there's going to be more tagging and there's going to be less time that's going to be spent on removing the tags. That's just something that comes to mind. The seasonality of crime. I did my capstone on this for North Glen before I was on council, and there's definitely more tagging going on in the summertime than wintertime. It is, but it's year round. We were talking before we came in here. I've come back on a July 5-day weekend, driven 100 miles and found 2 tags. The next week, I'll go out on a Wednesday when it rained Tuesday night, and I'll find 20. Some winter days, somebody will pass through. You'll find, a dozen tags from the same person. So there is an uptick in the summer, but it's year round. And after coming up on 5 years now, I haven't figured out a routine because it's always different. When I started, I thought every Monday is going to be the busiest, and that's not true at all. And we touched about weather earlier. If it's 0 degrees and sunny, we can do graffiti. It's really like snow, heavy rain, stuff like that we're not on the road. But if I'm on the road, I'm going to do graffiti. So it really is a year-round removal.
And I'm sorry, my name is Gail Moon. I am the code compliance supervisor and the programs under my supervision. So we have found, and data shows that the quicker you remove the graffiti, the less it happens. So that's why the decreased hours works okay. Once we do that first initial sweep of a lot of hours, we notice the decline right away. When you remove it quickly, it's less.
Yeah, that's true, the broken windows theory, and also maybe rival taggers cross out and do theirs bigger and brighter.
But we're always happy to negotiate if you need us to go more the hours, if you have more stuff that you need taken care of. As long as you guys give permission for us to be flexible with that, then that's something we can definitely take into consideration.
Cool, and I'm glad that you're also addressing like dumpsters and stuff too, because I didn't know who to contact since it's more of like a private instead of public, so.
Yeah,
Was actually,
I'm sorry.
it was actually one of the biggest changes in the program. I used to go to these areas and the businesses kept getting hit. And I'd leave and there's full dumpsters of graffiti. Come back, business hit, and I thought, what if we give them a clean dumpster? So I went to the companies, I said, can I get spray paint? There's no charge. I'm gonna get rid of all the graffiti on your dumpsters. Now, if they hit it, they hit the dumpster. And those buildings haven't been hit in years because people are more prone to a dumpster or a utility box than a business. So I'd rather cover the same dumpster 50 times with their paint than one time of a resident.
And the dumpster companies are happy to provide the paint if we will do it for them. So they're like, here you go, tell us when you need more.
That's
so
great.
They don't mind us supplying it at all.
That's really great. Denver in the past, they even did murals on dumpsters. It was, anything could be paint a mural on there. So that's pretty cool. I don't know. So that just got me thinking. This is great. We're going to talk about art and stuff. I love this. All right, cool. Even though it's graffiti, all right, I digress. I just want to add one thing as far as the sweeps go. The other jurisdictions, I consider them in maintenance mode. There's not a lot of graffiti. I'll drive 100, 120 miles most days and find 5, 6 tags to cover in multiple jurisdictions. So with that, that frees up a lot of time for the initial sweeps. And my focus would be here, 5 days a week for a few blocks of hours to knock it out as quick as I could, because that'll get you guys into maintenance mode quicker as well. So everybody else will be maintained. You guys would be the priority during that initial sweep.
And different jurisdictions have different agreements with us. Some of them just want us to do their main thoroughfares. Some of us want to drive down each private street and look for it. So depending on what you would want from us, we would have to build that into whatever we make an agreement with you guys.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Director Borgers, for bringing this forward. I was also going to start with broken windows theory. I'm a big fan. Sociology major, so that was huge. And of course, SEPTED and everything that's come out of that is super important. So the more you clean it up, the less they'll strike, so to speak. I have a couple of questions. It may not save us money, but do we know approximately how many hours-ish staff spends on cleaning up graffiti now?
So we have currently one of our sanitation employees, our trash and recycle employees that's working on it. She's also managing the recycle center, and we'd also like to put her on one of our recycle truck routes. And so I would say we would be able to get a half FTE back if we go this route.
Okay, great. So that's where I was leading into, just to figure out if it's not saving money, it's saving staff time, which is also something to consider. And then, let me see. So I think they kind of touched on this question that I had just a minute ago in terms of what is the method, I guess, to the madness of, it was mentioned that we get to decide like which areas, are there certain areas that we already kind of have in mind? Or is that when they do the sweep, they'll bring back a recommendation?
Well, Ryan and I were speaking earlier just before, and he's already got his eyes on a couple of our utility boxes that have been right next to where he's been, that he is anxious to get his hands on, and they're standing behind me. I'll let them answer.
No, I'll clarify, the IGA as it's written, and it's written this way for, I think, all of our jurisdictions, it's pretty generalized. It's written where we work with staff, you tell us what you want, but we don't want to put restrictions in the IGA that say you can only do these things. So the limit is on the hours. And we haven't found that we've needed more hours, no matter what happens within that. I think once we get to maintenance phase, he's not really hitting more than 10 hours generally in an area. But Ryan has had an idea of what he's doing in North Glen for about a year.
What I try to do, if there's an area you specifically want, I'll start there. Otherwise, I start the main north, south, east, west roads and hit those up and down every single day. Start with there, then work away into where the dumpsters are gonna be, things like that. And then eventually you just start snaking through all the neighborhoods. It's worked really well in the other jurisdictions. And with that, like, as you guys know, one side of the road might be Federal Heights, one side is you. Now we're getting two with one. Same thing with Westminster and you guys in some areas. I drive up a lot of your roads every day to get to different parts of Westminster or different parts of unincorporated. So it's pretty much a straight shot that we hit all the main roads. It just makes it really smooth and it's just consistent and it just works. Like, we had over 4,000 removals last year total. 1,600 were from just Westminster because it was their first year. And we had under 10 citizen complaints with that 4,000 removals. So on paper, it might look daunting, but it works. We love it. I love it. I've got a great team, and hopefully look forward to working with you guys.
Great, and I'm assuming staff has a good pulse on where those areas are if, above anyone. Although I have seen Councilmember Jaramillo. I've driven by and I've seen him taking pictures of graffiti on the side of the road, so he's also got his eyes on everything. And then my very last question is, the IGA is around hours, but is there like a trial period, or like, what is the time? Is there no time? Is there a contract in terms of like 6 months and
I
check
mean, in the IGA, and I think this is going to be between any governmental, either one of us can terminate at any time on our end. One thing that wasn't talked about that I think all of us are really proud about the program, we hire seasonal workers every year. It's become where we keep on staggered, 3 seasonal through the year. But these employees are hired, specifically we look for employees that have lived experience. And so we have hired people with lived experience in homelessness or criminal justice, and we've had really great success with that program. One of those employees is a full-time code officer with us now, so that has been great. But yeah, I mean, at any point, either agency could terminate the IGA.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So I have a couple of questions. I'm noticing Westminster, Brighton, and Federal Heights joined in. When did they join?
Westminster started February of last year, and Brighton was May of '23. Federal Heights was June of '23.
Okay, and Commerce City and Thornton, have you approached them yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
They are interested in the program as well. Logistically, from what I'm already doing, I've always been really interested in North Glen to just fill in the gaps as I'm going. So we'll start the talks with other jurisdictions down the road. We're really careful on not taking on too much. We want to make sure we have the right seasonal people, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So like, we're not gonna start with you and then the next day try to start with Commerce City. We do stagger it out. Trying to think. And then the other one we're gonna talk to is that little area of Arvada is another jurisdiction as well.
Commerce City actually approached us and said they heard about our program. They saw us give a presentation at the ICMA, and they had a representative there, and they approached us. So they are on our radar. They are begging for us to come as soon as possible, but we, again, to be fair to the jurisdictions that we bring on, we want to dedicate the proper time to each jurisdiction before we take more on. So we're trying to be very careful with that.
Okay. I appreciate you being here. I had way more questions, just looking at the presentation, and I was also with Councilmember Goff on the budget piece and the memo. When it says proactive, that's just driving around and finding it on your own versus waiting for a resident to turn it in. It's not proactive in the sense that we're trying to catch these individuals.
Correct. We don't do police reports. We do a before picture and an after picture, and on the map, everything is GPS located. All the pictures are saved though, and they've all got a case. There was an instance in Federal Heights where a lady used the name Bear, and I've seen that on some of your guys' stuff. They ended up catching her at night, so they came to me and said, how many tags do you have? I went back and looked, put together a whole folder for them, and they used that to help prosecute her. So the information is there if you need it or your police department needs it, but we don't actively do police cases. The only time we actively go to the police or sheriffs is a specific officer. I had one on a pole. It was like Deputy Johnson, you know, I'm going to kill you with a target or something. So I took a picture of that and sent it to the sheriffs directly because it was an actual name. But if it's just not a direct threat, then no, we just get rid of it. But the pictures are always there for you guys.
And that incident in Federal Heights where they actually caught somebody, we did negotiate. They did have to pay us for some of the research Ryan was doing, but it was a minimal cost for what they were going for. But so it's always available, but our main goal is just to remove the graffiti, not to prosecute. But if the police department was to catch somebody, we would have some information to go back and look at in your area.
Okay. And then as far as access to our North Glen CRM system, is that something we will monitor and then share with them?
Correct, yes. You would monitor it and forward it, just forward information to us through Ryan. We have a dedicated graffiti hotline. We have a dedicated graffiti email. You're welcome to share that with your residents, and they can report it to us themselves, or you can take it through your own CRM and report it to us yourself.
Okay, so then we still need a staff member to do that piece, correct? I just want to make sure that happens, because it seems like it'll be a faster response to clean it up. Maybe you'll find it before our residents do.
Hopefully.
And that is something that could be reviewed down the road. Brighton, like 6 months after we started, we just touched base with them. And our contact, Jonathan, he's like, we thought the system was broken because we haven't had any complaints. So ideally, down the road, if that wasn't needed, that'd be great. But at first, we wanted you guys to keep it so you can get a good idea of what's still coming in and whatnot. And also, with all the other jurisdictions, I have contacts. If they see something, they'll just text me or send me an email, and I get to it right away. So once we get going with you guys and whatnot, you know, I will set that up.
Okay. On slide 8, it says additional services would be an additional cost. What are those?
I think something like I mentioned about doing the research for the police reports to try and find those actual taggings. When was it? How big was it? What do we think it cost for us to remove it? All of that kind of stuff. So additional things like that. Can you think of anything else additional that we?
I think that's right below the April through October. So was the 6,600 those months?
Yeah, that.
So the $6,600 or so is for April through October, based on the 40 hours for the first 2 months and 20 hours subsequent to that. So if for some reason we did go over on hours, or we wanted them to do additional work outside of those months, then we would just pay them for the cost of that.
Okay. And what budget would this come out of?
It comes out of sanitation right now.
Is that the same? Is that the plan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Kondo, did you have something else?
No, I was kind of curious as to what kind of forensics you did, but you answered the question previously, so thank you.
I'm a math person. I think the max you would end up, if we did it all 12 months, would be around 10,000. But we don't usually hit even 20 every month. So odds are you're gonna stay within this 6,000 for a 12-month period. You could go over that, but the max would be around 10,360.
And that's if we dedicated those 20 hours.
Every 20 hours, every single month, plus the 240. That's the max.
Okay. What sort of, I don't know, do we get a timesheet, some sort of report back?
Yeah,
know
so
what we're paying
he
for?
tracks every hour and the number of cleanups that he does in each jurisdiction, and that will come with the billing. And it did, so we track it monthly, we bill quarterly.
Okay.
But yeah, that'll come with it.
Okay.
And you can also see real-time cleanups. That graffiti portal, it's on Adams County's website. And so you guys can go in and look and see what he's done day to day, hour to hour, within North Glen.
Because it is
It's
active
live.
As soon as he puts it in the system, it shows on our map. So it is live data.
Okay.
It's my favorite little toy.
So Director Borgers, what is our next step?
Excuse me. So if council would like us to move forward with this IGA, we can have that on the council agenda for next Monday.
You guys okay with that? One thing I would also like to do is, I'm sure you would probably already think of it, but a couple months in, can we get a report on how it's going?
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item, automated speed enforcement systems. Deputy Chief of Police, Randall Darlin, is here to present this item. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I'll wait for our... The often talked about automated speed enforcement. So really the focus here, over the last few years, there's been discussions about automated speed enforcement in the community, right? We've had speed van discussions. Sometimes the costs really didn't benefit the city. The ordinance was very specific. You still had to have persons present to do those operations. Well, the ordinance has changed. The state statute has changed over the last year, which makes it a much more feasible product for us to implement in the city. And this is really in response to both council's direction during the strategic plan kind of pushing this forward, as well as Councilmember Luke Manjaramosa's request on speed corridors throughout the city and potential automated speed enforcement within different areas within the community. So when we look at, sorry about that, I went a little too fast. So we look at some of the key considerations. We've got community impact, legal and policy framework, technology and infrastructure, costs, of course, and then the implementation timeline. Each one of these have a varying number of factors, right? The community impact, we hope to reduce speeding, lessen traffic accidents in our busy corridors and our busy areas. The legal framework, it's not excessively complex, but it is very specific. We have a state statute we have to follow. Part of the statute requires the city to draft an ordinance so that we're operating within the state statute and within our own city ordinance on these automated speed areas. The technology and infrastructure would be managed by a separate company, very similar to the Flock implementation, where we lease the service provider leases us the technology. They manage it, they take care of it, they maintenance it. The cost and funding for the program, the program's truly designed to pay for itself through the process of automated ticketing and collection processes. And the implementation time frame really is, what we recommend is just kind of a slow rollout. Start small, and we can build from initial implementation. When we look at the city designated speed corridors, we worked with Public Works, with our traffic engineer, and identified 3 areas that really are clearly articulated by the data to support this type of enforcement action, right? So 104th between Croak Drive and Livingston Lane, Irma between 104th and Leroy Drive near J.C. Park, and 112th Avenue between Washington Street and Larson Lane. Those are our highest corridors. They have significant traffic, high number of motor vehicle travel, along with significant speeding in and around those particular corridors. Now, our residential neighborhoods, I'll kind of go through that as we progress through the process. They're not going to be high-volume locations. This would be more of an opportunity for us to use it as a traffic calming measure, to really respond directly to complaints from community residents, and to really focus on targeted areas that would not be an area. Those residential zones that we identify would be much more of a traffic calming measure than it would be truly paying for itself or revenue generating in any way, based on the studies that we've done. So when you look at the traffic analysis, if you look, so these are going to be one direction, right? So these cameras have a cost, and they only cover one direction, okay? So this particular location, we did a speed study out there for 7 days, and 104th between Croak Drive and Livingston, this is eastbound traffic. 35 miles an hour is the posted speed limit. Over 7 days, there were 122,543 vehicles, so it's a high-traffic location, one of the highest in the city, right? The 85th percentile for speed is 41 miles an hour. 85% of all vehicles are traveling at or below 41 miles an hour. But when you have such high traffic volume and you look at the speeding compliance and the excessive speeding, you see 10 miles an hour, there's 5,000 vehicles per week traveling over the 10 miles an hour. When you go to 11 miles an hour, there's 4,124 vehicles that are exceeding by 11, and 2,781 that are exceeding by 12 miles an hour. And this is important because 10 miles an hour is the minimum speed that we can write a citation for using automated speed enforcement tools. Okay, so they must be exceeding the speed limit by a minimum of 10 miles an hour in order for this policy, law, and infrastructure to actually be used to cite a driver. We really recommend 11 and or 12 miles an hour in excess because of the limitations of the technology. There is a margin of error for radar. Okay, so 11 miles an hour gives us, depending on the type of equipment we use, pretty clear, articulable argument in a court proceeding. 12 miles an hour, even more of an articulable argument in a court proceeding. So when you look at the numbers going just the other direction, Same location, speed limit is identical. We see 4,060 vehicles per week, and again, this is over a 7-day period. 3,291 at 11 miles an hour and 2,250 at 12 miles an hour. So significant traffic volume, significant traffic speeding, and it would provide a pretty solid number of violations on a very regular occurrence. Obviously, we would hope that as these technologies are implemented, we'd start to see these numbers reduce, right? Drivers learn, they adapt, they bring their speed down. Great, now we're operating safer neighborhoods, safer community, less traffic accidents, and safer pedestrian crossings in and around the location. When we move to our second kind of location, and it's truly our third speed study because these are directional, right? They're not just one location. Irma Drive between 104th and Leroy Drive near J.C. Park. Speed limit, again, 35 miles an hour, significant vehicular traffic, but still a reduction over Huron there, over 104th. 41 miles an hour is the 85th percentile. And you see about 1,000 vehicles over 10 miles an hour, 803, so a significant reduction, 535. But we're talking about potentially 2,000 citations a month, all the way up to potentially 4,000 citations a month, depending on the threshold we set the speed violations at. When you change directions, it does reduce, or I'm sorry, it actually increases. When you change directions at the same exact location, the traffic numbers are a little higher, the speeding numbers are a little bit higher in each one of the ranges. 1,234 at 10 miles an hour, a little over 1,000 at 11 miles an hour, and over 700 at 12 miles an hour. Still significant numbers. When you consider 712, when you extrapolate that out over a month, you're looking at, 2,800 citations in a month's time, in a 4-week time frame. So what we're looking at is the opportunity to really provide enforcement 24 hours a day. We don't have that opportunity with the police department. Our traffic team can't be out there 24 hours. No officers can be out there 24 hours. So this really kind of levels the playing field in some of these locations. When we cover our third location, 112th Avenue eastbound between Washington and Larson, again, these numbers start to come down a little bit further. We have vehicle traffic is actually a little bit higher at this location, but we see the speed totals are less. The infrastructure is a little bit different here. It's not as wide of a road. It's a little tighter. There is narrowing of lanes. So here we see speeding at 593 at 10 miles an hour, down to 320 at about 12 miles an hour, but still a significant number when you extrapolate it out over a month. It's up to 1,200 speeding citations, on a monthly basis. And when we change directions here, we see very similar data. It doesn't change significantly. The vehicle traffic's almost identical, but we do have a little bit lower speed numbers across the board between 10 to 12 miles an hour. These locations, when we looked at it, we used some real-time data that our traffic analysts operate with. That's how we identified these 3 locations. And then we threw out real radar, true traffic study data to just basically identify and make sure that we were identifying the right locations. So in correspondence with the broader data that we have, these data points match that data, and they significantly show us our top 3 locations within the area. Within the city, really. So when you look at mobile AVIS, this is where I was talking about kind of our residential neighborhoods. This ordinance requires, this statute requires the city adopt an ordinance and identify speed corridors as part of that process, all right? Speed corridors can be residential neighborhoods, or they can be business districts, they can be main thoroughfares, right? They can't be highways. So they can't be, I'm sorry, when I say highways, I mean freeways. They can't be I-25, right? So we can't set one out on I-25. But the focus of these are really on our improved traffic safety, crime deterrence. We can use the data-driven methodology to really identify our locations and see if we see a change in driver behavior. It is a pretty cost-effective solution when you look at the 24-hour nature of enforcement and constantly having these run, and they generally will pay for themselves. Now, I will say that the mobile AVIS, moving it from community to community, where the speed limit is lowered. So our residential neighborhoods, the speed limits are 25 miles an hour. That means somebody has to be doing 35, 36, 37 before we can even write a citation. However, we can write warning citations. So if the goal of using a mobile AVIS in this location is to traffic calm and to give warnings and to let people know, hey, you're driving too fast, that is part of the process, and we can engage in that conduct so that we can maybe slow down the community members in and around the residential areas. But it may not cover itself in cost because the mobile AVIS technology is more expensive. It's about $8,500, about $2,500 to $8,500 per month on the lease program. They will move it for us and do all of the testing and all of the radar implementation and making sure that everything's calibrated. They'll do that for us, but they'll do it only on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis. They won't do it weekly. So it's not like you pick it up here and change it every week. You got to do it kind of on a consistent pattern. What this provides, though, again, kind of that cost-effective solution, 24/7 monitoring, which we could never gain as a police department, and we can work with our communications platforms to really provide public awareness on the program. It's also required under the ordinance too. So sharing data, telling the community how many tickets we're writing, sharing that type of data, part of the ordinance, part of the law. Mandatory for us to comply with that. Some of the things about the AVIS systems that are really beneficial and kind of what helps make this cost effective is that it's AI-based software. So what it does is it reads each one of the programs, and we've done an evaluation of 3 so far. They provide AI-based reads. So a computer reads the license plate, 2 separate AI systems within their software programs identify the registration of the vehicle. They each run independent registrations. They identify the vehicle. It is then sent back through a software platform to the police department to have an actual live review of each AI read, so that we're having a live review on that. Now there's a staffing component to that. We'll have to manage that. But based on the review we've done with the companies, a couple hours a day max for this type of thing, depending on how many systems we had in place and how many actual citations we were seeing. So we could manage that with civilian or sworn employees, and it can be a kind of across the board. It doesn't have to be one or the other. The system offers a payment portal with customizable options for languages. It's a financial system for tracking the inquiries and audits. You can the individual can log in, get photos of their vehicle, photos of their license plate, their speeds, their direction of travel, all of those factors right online. And that's kind of part of their mobile court interface, allows for that downloadable photo. They can see it in real time. You can see real-time adjudication. So when they pay their fine, they can see that it's been adjudicated through the system. Communications development and support, that's just them helping us communicate with the public about how this system works, what system we use, how it's provided. They'll help us with media relations, FAQs for the public. And then there's public-facing web content that can be accessed by the community to see how the system functions and to see the violations if they're issued a violation. You can't go in and see other people's violations, but if you have a violation, it'll give you a code and you can go in and see your violation. And then it has a full court system. So it won't burden our court tremendously. However, there is a process here that allows for an appeal, and that would come into our municipal court. So if they wanted to appeal the violation, then they would have to go through that process, and that could bring additional bodies and court call cases into our court. So we'll have to manage that process internally. And there will be, I'm sure, some level of appeal process for some individuals, depending on the facts and nature of each particular case that are kind of prevalent, right? When we look at cost, again, fixed cameras range from about $2,000 to $5,000, and there's a pretty big range here because it's not simply the cost of the equipment, it's the whole package program that they have, right? So Some of these systems, for $5,000 a month, you'll collect all of the fines for the first 500 citations written, and then after 500 citations, they'll come back in and collect a small portion of the fines, right? For $2,000 a month, they're going to collect portion of every violation. So it's a significant difference, and you just kind of got to look at, for us, when we start to look at, you know, the larger areas where we have significant numbers of fines, obviously leasing something for a fixed rate and having a significant number of those violations at no cost help us, and then a smaller cost as we move forward with, you know, high volume locations, whereas, you know, the mobile system may not even pay for itself, right? So maybe some of our larger locations that provide higher volume and more tickets, those violations are paying for that mobile use throughout the city. The cameras range from $2,500 to $8,500 on the mobile side. The court administration fees range from about $12 to $15 per citation. And the reason that it is also a range is because the law mandates that it can't be a per ticket number, right? So what they're charging is a lookup fee for the registration, a certain fee for us to mail the ticket, a certain fee for us to collect the violation. They cannot say per ticket we issue, we're going to take $12. It's fee-based for all of the different steps they take in a process. The law does not allow for us to have an agreement that provides a per-ticket basis price for the citation. So again, kind of the example total cost program, 500 citations issued is kind of a staple for most of these companies. And it's those first 500 are kind of part of your lease agreement, and then after that, they will come back in and take a small portion per fee for each ticket that they issue. When we look at potential positive outcomes, there are many, right? Again, we can reduce accidents, we can reduce speeding, which is the goal, right? We can free up our officers to pay special attention to other locations, our traffic officers in areas that are more focused on school zone, intersection related, because none of these are technically intersection locations, right? Intersection related and areas that provide, you know, some of our local neighborhoods where we get more traffic complaints, right? Revenue generation, the fines can support public safety initiatives. And then 24/7 monitoring, which we just could never do with the police department. It's just not realistic. And it's not the North Glen Police Department, it's any police department. Nobody has that capability, right? Not to say that there are no negative outcomes. Of course there are, right? There's a public perception issue here, right? This can be viewed by the public as a money grab. Can just be viewed as, you know what, North Glen wants to take fines from people and just collect money, right? There are privacy concerns, similar concerns that we've seen over the flock data, right? There are legal and compliance challenges. We have to comply with the state statute. We have to draft our own ordinance and pass it through council. Those are pieces of the process that must occur. There's an implementation to cost. We have to sign contracts. We have to lease agreements, right? And then there's potential errors for misidentifying or improper ticketing. I think that can be minimized mostly by the real-time review plus the AI. I think it would be minimized. No more, you know, difficult than officers have to do on a day-to-day basis when running radar or running LiDAR or identifying which of the 3 cars that went through that intersection ran the red light and which one didn't. There's always opportunity for error there. But nonetheless, it's a real potential negative outcome, right? So this program, because of the change in the statute, because of the change in the state statute and our ability to utilize the system, these are not heavy fines. The maximum fine under Avis technology is a $40 fine. That is the maximum fine that you can fine anybody. 10 miles an hour, 11 miles an hour, 12, 15, 20, the fine is still $40. So that's a positive and a negative. The positive is it's manageable for most people. It's not a high dollar fine. It is also not focused on points. So this has no points assigned to a driver's license, right? This is a civil fine against the registered owner of the vehicle. The positive is it has the opportunity to really change driver behavior, right? Because when you post the signs, which is mandated under this law, by the way, within 300 feet of every one of these locations, you have to post signs in any direction that you're going to travel through and read license plates and potentially cite. So those are, the opportunity for the drivers to learn, educate, slow down, change their behavior, right? So when we look at this, our next steps are really just assess council support for the program, take legislative action, which would mean council directing our city attorney to draft an ordinance for the city that meets all of the criteria required under the state statute. Our technical side, planning and working with a vendor to identify locations and which vendor we want to use. Contracting with those individuals, and then, installing the necessary signage across different locations in the city, as well as deployment of cameras and begin enforcement. The reason I kind of focused on a slow rollout is that I think the best way to roll this out would be to find our location, our top location, pick a direction or both directions in one location, identify a vendor, and start small. And then if we like the program and it's working and we think we're having success with it, then we can identify mobile locations and then secondary and third locations within the city and just kind of roll it out as we see, the success that we're looking for. Any questions?
Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Chief. This is a great presentation, all the information we need and organized in a very good way that makes sense. So a couple of questions I had was, first of all, at night, how much light do these cameras need to be able to read license plates? Do we have is that a consideration? Are there areas that might not work?
It's a consideration. The technology's pretty darn good. Our flock cameras will read license plates. What we lose in the dark is context. We lose make, model, color of vehicle generally at night. So the better lit the area, the better result we'll get with identifying context type clues, right? So if the plate is read clean and the plate comes back to the make, model of the vehicle we think it is, right? Then during the day, it's really easy. During the nighttime, we get a clean read on a plate because it's using infrared technology to read the plates, just like flock. But I can tell you right now, with flock, we lose context. So matching it to a vehicle, a little more difficult. There's margin of error there that we could see.
Okay, all right, great. And then the next question is, I noticed on the first two locations, you were looking at numbers of vehicles that go like 40 plus miles per hour. But then on 112th, you have 38.5 miles. Why was
So all that is the 85th percentile. So when we calculated out the 85th percentile, I did it for each location. The speed limit was the same in all three locations. It's 35 miles an hour. These are kind of main thoroughfare roads for Northland. There's some of our the only roads that have higher speed limits are 45 miles or 40 miles an hour within the city. These are 35. The 85th percentile is the number of vehicles that are traveling at or below that speed that's listed. In one direction on 112th, I think it was 38.5. The other direction, it was slightly higher, 41 maybe. But most of these were 41. So both the 104th, the median speed was 41. 85th percentile, not median, I'm sorry. 85th percentile was 41, whereas when you went to Irma, it got down to 41 in one direction, 41 in the other. And then when you got down to 112th, it was 38.5 in one direction and 38.5 in the other. So all that means is that 112th, the median speed, not the median, the 85th percentile speed is about 3 miles an hour slower there. So you're not going to have as many violators of speed violations there.
All right, yeah, I needed a math lesson. And then the last question is, I'm just wondering if we put these, especially the mobile ones out, but I guess any of them, will we be getting data back such that we could maybe identify patterns or even like regular vehicles in a certain area or certain times where we could then put a human police officer there to, I don't know, either be more effective or to stop the person and talk to them?
It is potential, yes. There is a potential to use data to be more focused on enforcement within a specific zone, yes, for sure. But again, I do want to clarify that under no circumstances can we write an actual citation if they're less than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit in any one of these Avis-type locations. It has to be that 10 mile an hour. That's a threshold data point. That's where the tickets begin.
Yeah, and I get that. I just was wondering, like, you might find some that are 20 miles over the speed limit, and if
Correct.
there's some kind of a pattern, you could then put an officer out there to approach that person.
We could also identify someone that drives through the area, daily at 9 miles an hour over the speed limit, and we run the registration and find out that resident lives at this location. We could certainly do a knock and talk and say, hey, we're seeing that your vehicle is speeding 9 miles an hour over the speed limit on a very regular occurrence over here. We want you to slow down. Public safety, safety for the community. So those knock and talks could be a result of the data that's there.
Great, I think that's a wonderful use of this, so thank you.
Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wonder if you can refresh my memory as far as statistically where we have most of our accidents involving injuries. I think it's 104th and Huron,
Yeah, 104th and Huron, Washington, and 104th.
104th and Irma.
Yep.
Did any of that come to play when you were thinking about selecting some of these locations?
So high traffic locations and high accident locations, yes. And then areas where you don't want to put these in an intersection necessarily because you're constantly having vehicles slow and speed and slow and speed. You're not getting a true flow of traffic, so to speak. The intersection related ones are more ripe for red light cameras, quite honestly. But the red light cameras I don't think are as effective data-wise as these are. Red light cameras tend to increase the number of accidents at an intersection, not decrease it, because you get rear-end collisions. You do tend to lessen the severity of accidents at an intersection because people tend to slow down when they know that there's a red light camera, so severity of accidents reduce, but you tend up actually increasing the number of accidents because people slam on the brakes not to go through, and you then get rear-end collisions, which are generally less severe than a full-speed, intersection crash, but nonetheless. So these are all off of major thoroughfares, off of the traffic signals.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I was kind of wondering why you didn't go all the way to Huron. You went from Livingston to Croak, for example. And then I think you probably answered my other question, which is, it sounds like the system is sophisticated enough that it could deal with 2 roads versus 1 road of traffic. And
Multiple lanes of traffic can be read at the same time.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Councilmember Roper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for this. This is very informative, and I think this is something that could be really beneficial. I know in Ward 4, we hear often about speeding, and it's something that is a concern for our community, so this is something hopefully that would help people slow down.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Deputy Chief, for this great presentation. I had first heard about it because Fort Collins started implementing this, and now they have a lot. I think they did the slow rollout. And I can tell you, just driving through there last week, I could feel the difference going through, that it felt more regulated. Maybe that was my imagination because I noticed all the signs posted. I'm a huge fan. I just think it's a force multiplier, right? So it can do so much more than one police officer can do. As you mentioned, we can't be everywhere 24/7, as great as that would be, so this is a way to do that. I just want to say I'm 100% in support of it. And then I do have a couple of questions in terms of the slow rollout. I think you said maybe 1 or 2 areas. Would you think about focusing on those higher traffic violation areas first to kind of see how it goes, like 104th or, 104th looks like the top.
I think that the probably one of the better ways to evaluate the program is to get as many reads and see how many, what kind of change do we see, right? So 104th, on Livingston, between Livingston and Croak, probably gives us the biggest opportunity to see what kind of change in behavior it's going to bring, right? Because you're having 125,000 plus cars in each direction on any given day. Throughout a 7-day time frame, right? So that's for a week, right? So it's significantly higher than the other two locations that, kind of meet the criteria where we see significant speeding over the speed limit by 10 plus miles an hour over a period of time. So I do think that the 104th would be a great place to start. We could start with one camera or two, so you cover both directions or one direction of travel, and then we can evaluate how is it functioning. Are we seeing people pay the fines? Are we seeing people respond? Are we seeing a change in behavior? We start out, we put it out there, we put the signs out there, and we write 2,000 tickets in month one, and in month two we write 1,500, and in month three we write 1,000, and so you see the change in behavior, right? So at that juncture, we could then maybe extrapolate that out when you look at putting it into maybe 112th, where our tickets are there's only 500 possible tickets in the time frame, right? So in a week, right? So if we see that drop to 100, does it cover its cost at that juncture, right? Because these aren't inexpensive. They're going to be roughly around $4,000 to $7,000 a month in lease fees for these, and then, and they'll generally cover their own costs, I think, very well. But there could become a point where we push it out too far to where it's no longer covering its cost. So that's kind of why I look at the slow roll.
Okay. I mean, it is, as you mentioned, in some ways kinder than, having a ticket written where you have points and a court appearance. So in terms of the education or that public-facing information, education, I think that's really important. I know, just use Fort Collins because that's where I saw it first. They did a lot of public education. And I think having people understand the benefits of it versus just the, the penalizing part of it, so to speak. Just like the Vail board, which made me think, so Vail gets a portion of the money that goes towards victim assistance programs through the court system. So this would not apply. It was just a question I was thinking.
Yeah, so it can be used for public safety, but I don't know specifically. The law doesn't really clearly direct it, it just guides it.
Okay, that's just a question I had that might come up during one of our Vail meeting boards, like how would this affect the Vail resources and whatnot. Okay, my last question is, does it or will it, maybe in the future, because technology is changing, have the ability to interface with Flock? So if a car that's red is pegged on a Amber Alert or stolen vehicle or crime, does that connect somehow? I know they're completely different systems.
It is a completely different system currently. However, based on the technology and the use, is there a potential where that could be all kind of a one service system? Potentially. But they are, right now, in order for Flock to read a plate, it reads the plate and then runs it through certain systems. This isn't running it through those same systems, it's just identifying speed. However, it's the same technology, so is there a potential for it to potentially be used by that? There may be a company at some juncture that says, we're gonna do this and we're gonna offer that software, and it could be multifaceted, so to speak. But right now, none of the companies we've looked at, nor do I know of a company that does all of it.
I may have just given away a really great idea. Darn.
Axon will come up with it, I promise you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it would be worth the cost. I think it will pay for itself. And our residents have been asking for more creative enforcement, and more enforcement. And I think this is a way to do that, to answer our residents' concerns. And I will leave it at that, but I 100% support. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. So, we have a traffic team, right? And there's 4 officers, is that correct?
3 currently. The goal is to get to the 4th.
And they're on motorcycles and they can only work during the day, correct?
They work primarily during the day, but there could be shifts if we had enough officers to spread out across broader time ranges, yes.
I thought I heard we didn't like them driving at night.
I prefer keeping them during the daytime because motorcycle has low visibility, but is there potential and have others driven at night? Yes, they have, so it's.
Okay. And then these, because I had the same question that Councilmember Goff had, these are also primarily during the day.
No, citations are written 24 hours a day, round the clock.
But will we be able to, I thought you said something about it has to be light enough to catch it and that there's a higher error? Did I
No.
misunderstand?
So being able to clearly identify the vehicle may be reduced slightly at night, right? But these citations are issued based on the registered owner of the vehicle. And if we have a clean, clear license plate read on the vehicle and it is speeding, that citation can be issued. The difference is when I'm making an eyeball, so I've got to review it as a person. When I make an eyeball of the vehicle, I see a license plate 123456 is registered to a blue Hyundai. I see a blue Hyundai during the day. I see 123456 clearly at night, but I may only see a four-door sedan, and I can't tell it's a blue Hyundai. It doesn't prohibit from writing the citation as long as the license plate's clear.
Okay.
It's just a little easier during the day for me as an individual officer that's verifying it to say, yes, that's the plate, and yes, the plate read matches a blue Hyundai versus at night where I'll only be able to say that's clearly the plate that's red.
Okay. And then, this may be similar to your question, do they have any capability to grab an expired plate while they're there?
They don't cite for expired plates, but it would run the plate and we would get registered owner and we would get whether or not the vehicle is actively registered or expired. That would be part of the read, but it wouldn't be issuing citations for expired tags. It only issues, this statute only provides speed enforcement with these cameras.
So I did see one of the slides that said it'll free our officers up for other things. Do we have like traffic enforcement at night?
We don't have dedicated traffic enforcement, but our patrol officers do a lot of traffic enforcement at night. So our focus on the patrol side, which is when the nighttime shifts are going back to our safety sensitive zones and more of our residential neighborhoods. What this will free up is primarily traffic officers can totally focus on, because these are some of our highest areas where our traffic cops write most of their tickets. So this could pull them into school zones more often. It can pull them into other areas that we're not enforcing as often on, where maybe we don't always have 500 cars that run through that area speeding, but we still have a significant speeding problem in an area.
We absolutely have residents. This is the number one thing that they ask us about. So is 120th at all in play?
It is, but it is less, we based on the data, it has less speeders at 10 miles an hour and over, and part of the reason is because the speed limit is either 40 or 45. So when you get to 40 or 45, now you need to be doing 50 and 55, and that feels different to most drivers than 45, right? Because now you need 40, you got to be doing 50, 45, you got to be doing 55, 56, 11 or 12. So most drivers, when you start getting that speed, feel that in a confined area like 120th or when you're in a business corridor, they feel that speed differently than they feel 45 miles, 46 miles, or 47 in a different infrastructure spot. So we don't see the numbers, basically.
Interesting mayor's coffee this weekend at the Carl's Farm Senior Housing, and they're right there on 120th. Lots of speeding. They're very concerned about it, but also as the nights get warmer and the sun stays out, the drag racing is increasing again. So they're definitely going faster. I just don't know that, we're catching them. So I just wondered about that enforcement and if that's still in place.
So sure, like if we have less responsibility in other locations, can we move more enforcement to 120th? Absolutely, certainly we can. And it's not to say that speeding's not occurring on 120th. It's just to say that when we look at our data from our traffic engineers, the number of vehicles speeding at 10 miles an hour or over on 120th is significantly less than these other three locations.
A lot of the conversation around data and data, showing a change of behavior, it led me to go back into our safety zone data that you send us. The most recent one I believe I have is January. I don't know some of the codes, so if I just look at the snapshot. I can't tell if that's a speeding violation or a stop sign violation. Then I looked into the spreadsheet. I don't know the call signs. You could probably tell me what they are, whether it does have time, so time of day. We continue to hear about speeding at night, and I'm just wondering if we're really controlling or patrolling daytime. And so if there's any way to break the data down by what is the actual stop and time of day.
So the speed safety sensitive zone data, I can tell you right off the top, everything in Fox Run Parkway, almost exclusively, there are some variables, are stop sign violations, overwhelmingly. Same thing with Malley and Irma, right? The violations that are on Community Center Drive are almost exclusively speeding violations. The same with Melody, almost exclusively, because there aren't stop signs in the zones. Melody has one. It has one coming off of a side street that's technically in the zone, but they're all, those are speeding. Whereas in Fox Run Parkway and in Malley, there are multiple stop sign locations within the zones that people violate regularly, and we're not finding as much speeding in the zone. We find 4 and 5 and 6 miles an hour over the speed limit, but we don't find 10 and 12 and 13, 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. Where Community Center Drive, it's fish in a barrel at 12, 13 miles an hour over the speed limit all day, every day. And similar on Melody. Not quite as aggressive on Melody, but it's there.
Okay. Well, I would actually love to have another conversation about those, because this is, the safety zones was something that we made a decision as a council to do and to implement, and we get the data, but we don't really discuss the data. And it might be nice to bring it back to talk to council, because depending on the month, it's, 80 stop sign tickets in Fox Run and 15 speeding things on Community Center Drive. And it's like, what behavior are we trying to solve? And I know it wasn't stop signs in Fox Run that was the issue. So I just want to make sure that the strategy we're using is actually changing the behavior, like you mentioned, right? And so when I think about this, yeah, I'm all in. I think we have to address speeding, and any resource that we can come up with, I think this makes sense. But I also don't want to just keep throwing stuff at the wall, hoping it's going to stick, and not really ever digging into this data. Because the more I looked at it, the more questions I had. So I would actually love to have a separate conversation about this data.
Mayor, thank you. If council would like us to schedule a study session to dive into one of those reports, we're happy to do that. I can tell you, using Fox Run as an example that you just shared, we have received several complaints about stop sign violations. So it's a combination of both. But Deputy Chief and Chief, happy to come to a future meeting and talk more about what the data is telling us and how they're using it within the larger context of enforcement. I can share anecdotally, when I was on my ride-along back in November, multiple stop sign violations, Fox Run, speeding violations throughout the city in terms of the patrol officer I was riding with throughout the night.
I think that's great. I
And
don't know that it's
pretty sure it's not just because I was riding with that
Yeah,
officer.
it may have been. I think it depends on the night that they're having, for sure. But I also know there's convenient places to stop and hide to watch a stop sign, but the speeding around by Stonehawker, there's no place to hide. And so they don't find a spot to try to catch the speeding, and so they focus on stop signs. At least that's what I'm noticing. So I just think it'd be good to look at the data, because we want to know if this is changing behavior or not. It doesn't seem to be. It might be. I mean, if there's any way to get the data, maybe Jason can make a fun little bar graph, like a budget graph. But something that can show us that we made a decision to put resources in a specific area, and we'd like to see that it's making an improvement, I guess. That would be mine.
Absolutely, we can revisit that conversation. I think part of what we'll need council to help us think about is what's the measure of success? Because this is a conversation we've come back to a couple times now, and that's not to say we shouldn't. It's just, I think there's going to be a certain level of, I think we can point to data indicators to say, yes, we've made a dent in it. But I think we've also done a good job in putting a dent in certain areas that I think, in my experience talking with residents, they want more enforcement to a degree, if I could characterize it that way. And so this would be a different set of tools in addition to all the other tools. I mean, if you get a stop sign violation in a safety sensitive zone, I think that ticket's on upwards of $200.
That's like 300.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's the other thing to keep in mind about this program is the safety sensitive zone is where you really have the significant penalty. And again, goal of changing behavior, but yeah, we can talk about all the different pieces.
So if we were to, this program does not function in the safety-sensitive zones or school zones because the fines are capped at $40. Now, if it's a school zone, it can be doubled to $80, but our school zone violations are several hundred. So this program necessarily doesn't function in the safety-sensitive zones. However, there are some areas where near the safety-sensitive zones, Melody being one of the locations, the south branch beyond the safety-sensitive zone, this could be a location especially for the mobile box to be used on a kind of rotational process there. And the same with other locations, but we wouldn't be able to use the mobile box inside of a safety-sensitive zone because the two defeat each other in ordinance. The law, they don't comply with each other. So.
Okay. Well, and I lean more toward the mobile devices just because I think they have more application and might feel better to residents who have complaints and then they could see a mobile device in their area for a period of time. And maybe that has a broader, I don't know. When we talk about changing behavior, a fixed camera, people are going to figure out pretty quickly. Then they will never speed right there, but they'll speed everywhere else. And so the idea of the mobile one is more appealing to me.
I agree, especially for our high complaints. However, that one's going to cost,
Yeah,
right?
I see that.
Because, so what we're trying to do is, a net zero, or no cost to the city. But DC and I talked about this. Sorry, I'm a little congested. DC and I talked about this, how important it is, especially having something that's rotating. So according to state statute, we have to post it, and here's another reason, right? When you have the mobile units, you have to post it for 30 days, right? And give those, you have a warning phase. Well, if we're moving it every 3 months, that could be a problem. However, once it's posted, so say we do it on Melody, and then we pick another area in Ward 1 or Ward 2 or Ward 3, and we put those in there, but we'll put the signs up. Once we go through one rotation, so the next year, we don't have to post again, and we can do immediate summonses or citations for those. But we wanted to bring you something because if we're going to try to start that program this year, we didn't want to, I want to respect Jason's budget and your budget, so we didn't want to bring that forward. But that is such a potential, but it will cost, right? And that's more expensive. I think that about 8,000, right?
The mobile device will not earn its $8,500 a month price tag. It's just highly unlikely based on the data we have because the speeding has to be 10 miles an hour and over for the read. So, in our locations like Fox Run, if we, let's just pull that out of being a safety sensitive zone and let's go put it over by Stonehawker. Our data does not show that we have hundreds and hundreds of cars exceeding 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. We have hundreds of cars doing 6 miles an hour over the speed limit, and 7 and 8, but not 10, which is the threshold for the law. So that box, we can move it. We could use it as a traffic calming measure. We could move it on a monthly basis or even quarterly, however we decide. But it will not likely make enough money to pay for itself. So some of the other locations that we put in these areas, they have the potential to make enough money to cover both costs, the cost of the mobile and the cost of the fixed, so that we can use it kind of, as a traffic calming measure mobily and as an actual change in behavior and focus on revenue in certain locations.
So you're recommending a combination.
That is the recommendation in end, yes, it would be both.
So why are we talking about the high end? Like, why is there a range from 2,500 to 8,500, but we're only talking about 8,500?
The company that provides the most service and most practical program is at $8,500. So I know that because I've already done the research, right? But I haven't come back to you with all of those factors yet. We'll do that again in another study session, or not a study session, but contracts and everything else, right? So I know that particular unit's about $8,500, and the other one's about $2,500, and they're also trailers. Some of them are trailers, and some of them are just a box. A fixed box looks like a mailbox kind of, but a little taller and a little different, right? The trailers are more difficult to use. They're not as easy. The fixed box, they'll come out, move it. They'll make sure that the radars are calibrated, and they'll sit in a place for, a month, 2 months, 3 months, however we decide to go with the program. But 30 days is kind of the minimum because that's how often they'll move them under the contract, right?
I think if you go back to slide 15, it's helpful for me to have actual numbers. That's such a span, because 2,500 seems doable, but 8,500, I could see the point you're making. So to have such a range like that in a slide, I'm like, you might as well just tell me what it's actually going to cost. That's easier for us to make decisions about.
And that'll be when we finally identify a vendor, right? There's 3 vendors that have come to us, and those are the ranges of their costs for their services. It's anywhere from $2,500 at the low end to $8,500. But it's not just the cost of that particular device that really works. It's how does the software integrate? It's how does the court process work? It's all of those factors that are going to help us decide what it's going to be, or what maybe the best vendor for us will be. And then we'll bring you kind of our rank order for that, and then you guys are the policy makers, you're the decision makers on those, and we can kind of talk about that.
Okay. Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In regards to the fixed systems, do we need to run any electricity or anything like that, or are they all
So
self-powered systems?
they're either battery operated or solar operated.
Okay.
Generally, they can work off of both. They can be powered, but they're mobile, so running power to them, not necessary. We can run it off of battery or solar.
And I'm assuming that with the mobile or the trailer configuration, I mean, part of your challenge is finding a space on the side of the road where you could park this thing for several months.
That is, and when we get into the more residential areas, cars end up parking. So you need to kind of find an area that has a free visibility location for that as well. So all of those factors will kind of come into the boxes I've seen and the trailers I've seen have the ability to kind of be stationed where they're visible, because again, you still have to use signage, and all of those factors are identical. It doesn't matter whether it's a mobile device or fixed. All of those are requirements. But the ability to utilize them on the side of the road has to be also, the infrastructure needs to be right for it to work.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? No, I think it bring us back more information.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, third item, code enforcement. Welcome. Gonna tell us all about it?
Sure, if you want me to. Now, I just want to notice for the record that I did not touch the button this time around, so I'm proud of myself on that, so thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Going to walk through code enforcement discussion tonight. A few things I want to tee up is that this was brought up during the council strategic session, and I think one of the prompts that I gave council at that iterative process is, what are the measurements of success? So tonight, what I wanted to be able to do is to provide you sort of the background, the baseline, where we've been, how far we've come, what we do, provide that sort of data to kind of create that context and that backstory narrative of what we're doing and why we're doing it the way we are today. And then to provide an opportunity, I gave some prompts for some questions to sort of start a conversation going. But really what we want to try to do in this exercise is really just sort of solicit your feedback and kind of get some understanding about what is working, what isn't working, are there things we're missing. But I also want to just also say at the onset here is, this is not necessarily let's get it done tonight. If there's more need for additional information and effort, we're happy to do that. But just once again, want to get the ball rolling here with this for council as it's part of our strategic plan. Okay, so covered that. See how quick I'm going through the slides already? It's amazing. So this is sort of the backstory and the history, and some of this predates my era with the organization, and I've been here for 13 and a half years. But before coming to the city of North Glen, there was a huge emphasis that beautifying North Glen through code enforcement, and that there was a very clear message when I started here that the only way that we were going to preserve the character of North Glen was through code enforcement. And with that impetus, we couldn't be too forceful, had to be nice, but we had to get results. The other part of this is that there was an exercise before I started called Clean Sweep, where, for lack of a better term, it was a scorched earth approach where officers walked street by street and wrote up every single possible violation. And I am not overstating this, that if you had a daisy in your yard, you were getting written up for weeds. And that did not go well. It was not a very successful campaign, and I believe it created more blowback than it solved problems, because what it really felt like for a lot of folks is that the city was just picking on people, and it wasn't a productive and fruitful exercise. But it was trying to address that very loud voice at the time of the city's not doing enough to preserve and beautify the city, because there was this overarching concern that there wasn't many tools in our toolbox to help promulgate and promote North Glen as a vibrant community like it is today. Other interesting aspects to the backstory here is that we had twice the number of staff that we have today, actually more than that. However, their results weren't any different. In previous exercises with City Council on this topic, we've had conversations about our staffing in relationship to other communities and the relationship to per capita in terms of population, households, all those types of things. And historically, we have had a higher amount of coverage than other areas. I will say that the last exercise we did back with council in 21, that trend was shifting closer to us. We did not do that exercise for this because it didn't seem to be germane based on the direction in the strategic plan. But I just want to provide that context because there was always this impetus of, Brooke, do you have enough staff? And can you do more? As we go through this conversation, I'll kind of touch on that a little bit. The other thing that we had with our process, because we were trying to be friendly and gentle, is we had an extremely protracted process. It could take literally 12 months to 18 and a half months to issue a summons, because we would put a door hanger on a door saying, hey, there's a violation. We'd follow up with a note saying, hey, did you remember the door hanger that we gave you? This is just a friendly reminder. And this process would go on and on and on. And when I stepped in, I looked at this as, this is busy work for staff. And that what we're really doing is we're creating data saying we're making contact, but we're not affecting results. And one of the things that became very apparent shortly after I arrived is that many, many people in the community largely because of the clean sweep effort, figured out, hey, I need to game this system. And there was very much folks that knew what to do, when to do it, just to keep from getting pushed to that next step in our very long and iterative process. A couple of other things that we also had going on is we had conflicting code language throughout the municipal code. Most of the code enforcement takes place in Chapter 9, but also in other aspects of our code, we literally had statements that conflicted, and so people would constantly challenge us as to, well, it says here, I don't need to do this, but here you're telling me I have to. So that was another big challenge. Also, we were not legally following prescribed processes for due process when we were doing these abatements. We were actually going out onto people's properties and cleaning them up, leaning their properties without really giving them due process. And so we went through a very exhaustive exercises in the 20 teens of North Glen to sort of update and clean up a lot of this stuff. We also issued virtually no citations, and I want to point out that a citation is basically a ticket. So like we used to have a process where you get a $100 ticket, a $250 ticket, and a $100 ticket. We never did it. It just wasn't a tool that was very effective. We also performed, and we were talking earlier about graffiti, our code staff used to remove graffiti. So not only were they writing citations, they were cleaning up graffiti. We had one officer who was completely dedicated to that exercise, as well as doing commercial code enforcement. It is a very challenging process. We used to self-perform our own abatements. We did not use third-party contractors. Our staff would go out and get a roll-off from Public Works, and we would go out and abate the properties. That was how we used to do things, and we would lien the property against the hourly rate that we would have our staff, because that's how things used to be done. Now, can you imagine writing up all these violations and then having to go clean them up because someone didn't do it? That was part of what we used to do. Other aspects is that our officers did not have police radios when I started. They did not have protectives such as mace and asp. They had the option for a bulletproof vest. Not everybody wore them. And the other thing is that as part of this clean sweep endeavor is that we didn't want to look imposing. We didn't want to seem like we were the bad guys. And so they literally looked like Best Buy employees when we started. Now, part of this is that right now they wear gray and black shirts. We don't have them wearing heavy equipment, everything like that, but we do want them to look professional. We want them to look like someone who, when they come to your door, you're going to recognize them as a North Glen employee and not a Best Buy salesperson trying to cold call you and knock on your door. So this was part of the transformation that took place over the time and after I started. So here's what happened in that time frame is that we optimized language and we eliminated the inconsistencies. And as you know, in previous years, every once in a while we find something that we need to tweak and work through that to try to make it even better. We improved the abatement procedures with a for-cause hearings. And so this is one of the things that was a big problem when I started coming out of the recession, is that a lot of banks held foreclosed properties, and it was very difficult to get people to perform because they would transfer ownership between different LLCs that the banks would hold to make it almost impossible to give due process. So we created a for-cause for out-of-state property owners to help us in the ability, if we're not able to serve a property, we have a means to do that now. We also improved our abatement procedures where we basically have to issue a summons into court to get a court order to go onto someone's property to properly do this. We have another aspect that came out of our exercise back in 2021 is chronic violators and reoccurring nuisance. And so right now, if you have someone who has more than 3 violations within a calendar year, we can label them as a chronic violator. Now, what that enables us to do is that we can go to the judge, this is a chronic violator, and we can get a standing court order to go out and do continuous abatement on the property and lien it, so that we don't have to start the clock over every single time we have a chronic violator. I can honestly say that since we implemented this back in 2021, we have almost no chronic violators anymore. We just don't have that problem. It's literally gone away. We also have an expedited court process. In the past, it used to be very complicated. We have a great working relationship with the prosecuting attorney. The judge understands that when we're coming to the court, this is our option of last resort. We have exhausted everything that we can do to be supportive, collaborative, and trying to achieve a successful outcome with a violation. When we go to the court, it's like, we're done. We've done everything we possibly can to help get them to comply. And the last thing that we did here, which is something that we just did a few years ago, is decriminalize nuisances. And what that means is that it used to be that someone could go into the court and go, I want a trial. It takes forever to get a trial through municipal court. So we decriminalized all of Chapter 9 nuisance violations. Now, for land use, we were unable to do that for various reasons. But what this does is it prevents the people who like to game the system to drag it out even further. Okay, a couple of other things. Neighbor on neighbor, and by the way, please jump in if you have questions. I don't want to just talk. This isn't going to take long for me to get through, but I also just don't want to talk too much in front of you. Neighbor on neighbor disputes. So this is something else that was very significant, where I think when we talked in 21, that code enforcement was being weaponized. So we provided a hotspot map, and you could literally see in certain wards where you'd have an entire block that was completely blood red because neighbor A thought that neighbor B was complaining. Well, then neighbor B thought it was neighbor C, and next thing you know, everybody's filing complaints on everybody, and it just got to be very, very challenging. The other things that we did is we have abatement assistance, which we'll talk a little bit more with the crew and their collaboration and what we're doing there. Quickly, we have a $10,000 budget, up to $1,000 a home, income qualified folks. We do not actively promote this. We use it when we need it. I will also say, which is very interesting, which is another anecdote, is that when it comes to abatements, largely landscaping, which is a high ticket dollar item, many people are starting to comply, and that the issues that we used to have in the past, it is not as significant as it once was for income qualified folks. So that's also something that's very interesting. Also, conflict resolution. So over the years, we've had on-again, off-again mediation. We have a lot of neighbor-on-neighbor conflicts. We have a lot of neighbor-on-neighbor issues. So we offer conflict resolution, and we do that through Crew, which is a great program. Crew has been a huge godsend for code enforcement when it comes to these issues. One other thing that we put into the staff memo that's not in the presentation is we also have where, hey, stop weaponizing the staff. We have letters that the city attorney's office has helped us put together where if we get a neighborhood or a situation like I was describing earlier, we will, if we think that we're just being used to escalate an ongoing conflict, we will send out a letter and say, unless it is a life safety issue, we will not be responding to any more complaints. And what that has also helped do is de-escalate these conflicts. And in many cases, we try to coordinate and collaborate with Crew on that as well. All right. I am not going to go through the detail of this slide, but other than to demonstrate that this is the process that we currently do now. New case, we issue a notice of violation. What I want to point out to the council members, if they're not aware, that's not a ticket. It is a, hey, you have a violation, here's your time frame to comply. Then basically we contact either the current resident and or property owner. If we find out that we cannot do that, then we send out written notice. Also, when we contact, if it's a renter, we also then send out a letter to the property owner so they are also aware of what is going on. We have this thing on top where we have extension, a second extension, and a summons. So typically the officer is given discretion to give whatever the term of that violation. So if it's tall weeds and grass, they have 7 days. They say, hey, look, I'm going on vacation. I'm not going to be able to get to it. Can I get an extension? Officer has the discretion. If the officer thinks this guy is playing me, they will say, no, you don't get an extension, you got to get it done. And if they don't comply, then we take steps. The second extension is one where the officer says, hey, look, there's a hardship situation here. They can go to the supervisor, ask the supervisor, this is the situation, will you authorize a second extension? Then the supervisor is aware of the situation and then can issue that. 90% of when we do these types of cases is for the landscaping, because over the last several years with coming out of COVID, people able to actually come out and do the landscaping for you is very difficult and challenging. And so what we've really tried to do is be recognition of that and be cognizant of the fact that you may be able to pay for it and you may be able to want to do it as quickly as you can, but if you can't get somebody out to do it, you got to take accommodations for that. So I just want to provide that context because we really do try to find a balance when we're looking with this. And I will say that in almost every instance, our only objective here is to get voluntary compliance. Unless we have these chronic situations or if we have known folks who we know who regularly like to game the system and who are problematic, if we feel like that's a more effective option, then we do these other steps, which is we can issue a summons into court and go to a court decision. These other steps here are also in our toolbox. If we cannot find the property owner, we have the for cause hearing, which I mentioned earlier. And then also we have the discretion to issue citations, and those are tickets. We just don't do that anymore. We just have never found it to be effective, but it is a tool in our toolbox just for something for council to consider. If you think that we need to redress or revisit some of our tools, that is something that we have available. Okay, so here's just some data. This is also in the staff report. I think that realistically what you're seeing here is that we had in 23, 1,600 cases with 2,200 violations. And just for those who may not understand that, a violation is, there could be tall weeds and grass, trash, just home and disrepair, but it could be just one case. This is our compliance. We're averaging in the high 90s. So just to put into context, you have 40 summonses in 23 with 1,600 cases. So it truly is the exception to our rule and how we operate. And then in 24, we had 48 summonses. Right now, between the 2 years, when you look at the last 2 years, we're averaging about 60 to 40% proactive versus 40. In 23, you'll notice in the charts, the pie charts that we provided, that it was a lower number. One of the things to keep in mind there is that we were actually in transition. We were onboarding new staff. We were down a few people. The other thing that happened in that year, while it doesn't really show in the other tables of data, is that we had 121 landscaping cases because we had so much rain that we had, with the shorter staff, it put a bigger draw down on our resources in order to be able to proactively enforce. And the thing is our officers, and I may have even mentioned this at some of the council meetings in passing conversation, the grass was going so quickly that our officers would go down to Street A and they'd write up 3 properties. And by the time they came back to follow up, the other half of the street was in violation. And so it was like literally we were kind of in a triage mode when we were dealing with those types of situations. So just a little bit more context there. So with that, I also put into the staff report that we have this tiered approach. And you will notice that we have the 4 tiers. Basically, there's 2 real variables here. The first 2 are proactive all the time. One is life safety and the other ones are blight issues. And then the third category is kind of that lesser priority, complaint-based type of violations. And then lastly, we have what we call interdepartmental coordination. And I do want to point out that this is a very heavy lift from a day-to-day logistics, because when Public Works comes to us and they have a grease interceptor where they have an illicit discharge, that staff person, this is 2% of their job. They don't do this every day. They don't understand what it is that's expected of them. And so we actually do semi-annual coordination meetings with the other departments to talk about what code enforcement is and what our role is. Because a lot of times we go, can you take care of that? And we're like, well, actually, we need you to help us tell us what you need done. Same with the building department, same with other departments that we coordinate with. So one of the things is those cases, while they may not represent a large swath of what we do, they can also be extremely time consuming because they're sometimes more complicated. A good example was we had a commercial property where the sanitary line collapsed. And it was a trunk main went through their property. Well, they had basically done illegal connections to the pipe that caused that failure. And so we ended up having to write them in a summons. Well, it turns out that the connections to the buildings didn't have building permits. And so it just snowballed into a bigger thing where we had all these different multiple violations. So with that, that's kind of a big overview of what we do and how we've been doing it. I will say that in my time here with Northglenn, it was interesting because when I look at like where the council complaints come through and what we deal with and also what we get through the city manager's office, is that in the first 4 or 5 years I was here, we probably averaged between 11 and 16 complaints from council a week. And the thing is like that is just what would come through. That doesn't include the phone calls that I would get. That is just kind of how we used to track the data. And when I look at where we are today, we have less neighbor-on-neighbor warfare, as like what we like to call it. We also have less feedback from council about resident complaints than we've ever had before. And you know, I've always likened it to, if everybody loves what you're doing, you're not doing your job well. If everybody hates what you're doing, you're definitely not doing your job well. But if you have a balance between that, I think you're hitting the sweet spot. And the last thing I will also comment on is, in my entire time that I've been here, we've had effectively maybe less than a handful of complaints, formal written complaints against staff. And of those, there's only been 2 that were actually substantiated complaints. And I think that's kind of important when you think about that this is probably one of the most sensitive and controversial things as a homeowner, as a resident, as a person in Northglenn, when you got someone to come up to tell you that you ain't doing what you need to be doing and you don't want to have to hear that. And it's a very delicate balance that we try to strike with that. Our staff gets annual ongoing training all the time to try to help them, give them the skills that they need in order to be as effective and transparent with their process. So here I posted some questions, but I'm definitely happy to open it up and hear what folks have to say and understand some concerns and how we might be able to do things better.
Well, I'm going to ask a question that I know is confusing residents. And when I do a quick, so I understand what the words mean, I just want to make sure we're using them in the same way. Looking back, I know you didn't want to spend too much time on that flow chart, but
Yeah. Well, I can do whatever you want. I just didn't want to go through every iterative step and.
No, I can read a flow chart. So I'm looking, like a notice of violation. Those are pretty stern. They're very official. I've seen them. And then the difference between a summons and a citation, because the summons leads to a court decision. Could the court decision be a fine or like what types of court decisions?
So typically what we look for when we take something to the court, we are going to the court to say, they have not complied. This is what needs to happen. And then the court will issue an order to say, this must happen. And then the court has the discretion to then say, in addition to this is what needs to happen and happen by this date or else, they can also issue punitive fine for what they just deem necessary under the circumstances of the case.
Okay. And then a citation is just straight up
It's a ticket
with a fine?
Correct.
And we don't do that anymore.
We have not found a need for it because once again, what we typically end up finding is that 97% plus people voluntarily comply. And those that don't comply, their cases are usually the more complicated ones. And it's very clear that just issuing them a ticket is not going to promulgate compliance. So we also feel like it's more like, hey, you're just piling on. Whereas if you go to the court then says, okay, I'm going to hear what's going on, understand the circumstances, and then I'm going to issue a decision on how this needs to get done and the best way to do it.
Okay. I mean, I guess I have a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts on this, which is why it came up, I'm sure, not just me, but because our residents do talk to us a lot about it. So to hear that it's less than in previous years is good. I don't think I had that perspective. But I hear two sides. Either I got a notice and my neighbor didn't, right? And so there's this unfair, unjust, how come you're harassing me but not him, right? That comes out a lot, right? I got this, but all those neighbors did it too, right? This sort of comes out whiny like that. And then the second one is, do something about that over there. And they don't think that we do, right? And there's this, I mean, especially if it's an election season and we're knocking on doors, I mean, they will be like, hey, I got to show you this. Look at that. Nobody's doing anything about that. Like, okay, that's a dead tree. I get it, right? But those seem to be the two big things, is there's this assumption we're not doing anything, that we're not doing enough, or we are and they didn't like getting, caught for something they did.
So that's that, yeah, that right there is you're not doing your job and you're doing your job too well.
Well, but not that perception of, I got a ticket for weeds, but they didn't. And I don't know, I do know that feedback has been heard, because now if they hit a street, they hit the whole street.
So our standard practice when we go out and do proactive is that if we see a violation, we hit the entire street. What typically can happen is that in most of these circumstances that you're describing, and I'll give you a great reference here in a moment, someone will call and complain on someone.
Yeah.
And we'll go out and go, yep, that's a violation. Now, if we're doing proactive, it could very well be we're like, yeah, we wouldn't write that up if it wasn't for a violation. And so sometimes what it is like, yeah, it technically is a violation, but it may not be something that our officer discretion would go, this is something we're just going to go hit. So then it's like you go down the street, there might be something similar to that. Well, as a general rule, if we're writing up person A, we go and hit the rest of the street. Now, the other part of this sometimes happens is that this was in violation when they had the violation, but then that property got in violation well after, and they're like, well, they're not picking on me now because they should be hitting them now. We hear that a lot. And I will say that one recent one that we had was, we're helping out the PD with abandoned vehicles on the street because we don't typically cover street violations. And we had a gentleman who literally came in and met with me to say, your officer is targeting me, and I know it for a fact. And so I went through the data, and basically animal control came in and wrote up his tickets, or wrote up his vehicles that were on the street. Well, our officer went up and wrote every other vehicle on the street, but that person didn't know it, but was completely in full belief that that was what was happening. And so the other aspect that we wrestle with this particular type of issue is, how do you communicate whether we're actually doing something or not? Because there's not an open case, there wasn't a complaint. If it's a proactive, you'd actually have to go in and file like an open records request in order to know what we were doing. And I explained all this to this person and said, look, we are not targeting you. This is part of a bigger issue that the city is trying to address. He was very respectful and very appreciative of all the time that I spent with him. It didn't register. It wasn't something that he was going, I get it. So
Okay.
I don't know how to fix that, other than to say that it is something that we are very sensitive to. And generally speaking, we do go out and try to equally apply the rule. And in cases, we've had folks who provide a litany of complaints about individual properties. And then we see, well, why didn't they write up the one right next to it? So when we go out and we write them up, we write everybody because it's really important that we seem that we're being even-handed. It's a hard narrative.
The other thing I wondered, I see that there's some that are residential and some that are business and industrial. Do we ever break that apart and look at trends? And then how might we communicate that? Like, I'm looking at some of these going, how hard is it to put out from our team, it's time to look at those overhanging branches, right? Like, I get a little flyer from my HOA that's like, do these things, we're coming for you, right? It's nice to get that heads up. And I just wondered if any of these we could be proactive about.
So what we do every year is we actually have what I call in the can code enforcement informational stuff that we do through the connection and on social media, where it's like we actually target these during specific times of the year, because the thing is like with dead trees, we don't go after dead trees in the winter. There's no leaves. How do you know? With tall weeds and grass, with overhanging branches, we do social media and we do pushes for that. With commercial, the majority of what we do with commercial is if it's trash and it looks bad, we're gonna go enforce it. But if it's like a sign code violation or if it's things like that, unless it's a complaint-driven issue, we typically steer away from those types of issues unless they're complaint-driven.
Okay, I guess I've missed those articles.
Yeah.
What is littering? Like, I know what littering is, but that's our number one.
It's our catch-all for general nuisance. So a lot of times what you'll see is people will have garbage spread across their front lawn, or there's piles of trash up against the side of the house, debris, things like that. So it's our general nuisance regulation, so it could be a litany of things, but generally it's our sort of our catch-all for things that need to get cleaned up.
Okay. All right, Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Director Spoda, for this briefing. I'm just curious, in the staff memo, page 3, where it has the two tables.
Yep.
Case distribution by ward. I'm just wondering, not picking on any particular ward, but Ward 1 looks like there's a huge jump from 2023 to 2024 for cases. Is that a typo? Or
Nope, it is not. So a couple things on this is that what happened in 2024 is we had a large amount of complaints about overhanging trees and branches. And so the officer in that ward went out and proactively started enforcing it, because it actually turned out that it was a rather substantial issue, especially in Fox Run. What we were finding is that we had a lot of trees and branches obstructing street signs, things of that nature, vision triangle issues. And so it was one thing where they just got on it and jumped on it. I will tell you that what was really jumped out at me in all of this is that historically, Ward 4 has usually had the most complaint-driven ward for a long-standing period of time. I would say that, with exception to the fact that we had so many proactives in 24 with the officer covering that. And one other thing, our code officers cover an area every 2 years, and then we rotate them out, so that no one officer gets into one position too long and they get to learn the city. And also it helps address that sort of bias issue that people sometimes project on staff, is like, they're picking on me because they just don't like me. And so, we rotate staff around to help manage that.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, that number just stuck out to me on that table, and I thought.
He got on it. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, he really did.
Yep.
But, I think the other thing that gives me, I guess, some comfort is knowing that you all are really trying to avoid getting to the point where a summons, where you're really actually using the hammer, and are trying to get people in compliance beforehand. That was something I did not know. And I don't know if our residents know that, or if there's a way to publicize that. We are trying to be fair, but we're also trying to work with our residents to.
I know that some of you may know, but like our code staff, This is probably, in my career, the best code staff team that I've ever had under my leadership. I think Tom Carlson has done a great job promulgating and empowering the staff. And I think what's really kind of emerged from all this is that they see that what they're trying to do is help the community, and that this is not a, hey, I need to flex my muscle and my ego because that's what I'm here for. It's really about how can we help people get into compliance, but also, and this is the tough thing, and I know a lot of them, this is the part that they struggle with, is like, when we're done, we're done. And we just need to move forward because we've done everything we can. And I think that's one of the things that we really try to emphasize with our code enforcement is, look, this is not a great situation for you. We recognize that, but we're going to give you every opportunity to comply. And when you can't, we message this to those folks in these difficult situations. It's like, look, we're going to hand you over to the judge, and the judge is going to come up with a plan so that you can get this taken care of one way or the other. And now they may not like the outcome of it, but at least we've given them what I would like to say is what we've tried to promote is a fair process. Not everybody's going to like it. Not everybody's going to see it that way, but that's what we're trying to do. That's our intention.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I guess all this begs the question, though, why is this in our strategic plan? And, I mean, to your 4 questions, or 3 or 4 questions, what is the work going forward, right? Like, this is a ton of data. I guess there's 3 questions. There's things in our code, like blowing dust. I did not know. I mean, how do you control that? It was very windy today.
So great example is Pioneer Sand. So we used to have a business across the street that would complain every single time the wind would kick up and would just pelt the glass on his door, and he hated it. And so we would go out and we worked with Pioneer Sand, and we said, hey, what can we do to help manage with this? And basically what they started doing was a watering effort in advance of weather events. The industrial park is a big area where we used to have this as an issue. Haven't had that problem in a long time. And, you know, that particular person that used to complain was like, you guys never listen to us, you don't care. So, yeah, it is something that does come up. It's amazing, and I will tell you that some of the stories behind some of the smaller violation counts, it's like you can't make this stuff up type of thing, so.
So are we missing a communication piece? That's what I'm wondering, because you just outlined, this is what we used to do and that didn't work. This is what we're currently doing and it seems to be effective. Why is it still an issue?
I think my opinion is that you can't manage the human dynamic on how people are going to interpret things. I think it's more of, if we're doing something wrong or if we misstep, we will own it. Yeah. And I think, you know, by and large, it's like, for instance, we had a person come in last week, first time in a long time, after talking to Supervisor Carlson, said, I want to come in and file a complaint. And so they finally, when they came in, we sat down, we had a conversation. It was explained to them in detail, handed them the paperwork to file the complaint. And when it got to the end of it, the comment was, they were just very stern and direct in the situation. They've not submitted the complaint. So it's this thing where people get really heightened and they get really upset. They don't like that. We also run into the same situation of you're just not doing it enough. You're not being aggressive enough. So I think it's both sides of the narrative. I think it's just one of those things that I can honestly say, especially with former council members, what they would hear from their residents versus what I hear now from council members as the level and degree of what you're hearing is negative feedback. It's not anywhere where it used to be. But I gotta say, as an elected official, this is the toughest part of the job. I mean, is hearing this stuff because it's personal. This is their homes. This is something that they value and that this is their their place, and it feels like a violation to people. It's a tough thing. I think, moving forward, it's really, we can put more messaging out there about what we do and how we do it. But we literally, with the same demeanor and the delivery I'm giving you, is what our staff strive for every single time, no matter how challenging the situation is. I mean, we have folks that are sovereign citizens that don't recognize the rule of law that we deal with. I mean, it's like the whole spectrum. And yet those people are going to probably complain to an elected official saying, you guys aren't doing your job. So.
Okay. Councilmember Burns.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think to answer your questions on here, are the most critical areas of code being addressed? I think at least that's what I hear a lot of, because our neighborhood got hit last summer. All of us got hit. And so a lot of us were doing yard work last summer. But, I've also had neighbors that have abandoned cars sitting on the street as long as I've lived in my home. So, and I know that's not you. I understand that's the police. But it's in code. If we're talking about code, it's
Sure.
part of our code discussion. And so I think it's to me, and especially in the labels that you gave us here of safety versus a nuisance, I think that dynamic is at odds for a lot of people who have seen this car. I eventually called in a car across the street from my house that had a car seat left in it, abandoned for a month. On my block, and finally I was like, okay, where does this belong? And then, we also have, so I think it's that to me is a point of contention when people who have been in neighborhoods for a long time see these other things that are, don't understand the different departments, but it's okay, my grass got a little too high, but there's this weird car that's been sitting here for a month. So from a safety perspective, where are our priorities? And so I can definitely see that. And I think, it's just, so I think in that critical area, are we doing the right thing? I don't know, I think yes, but I think there's just putting on a resident hat kind of situation. Because I think at least in, seeing the Ward 1 situation, but a lot of us are kind of live and let live kind of folk. Yeah. And then, are there any suggested modifications to the current approach? I think, just from personal experience, the only thing I think we need to do is that winter extension. It can't be March 1st because we have snow through May. So it's not fair to have
I think we did
people-
change it to April.
Thank you. I would think that makes a lot more sense. We have a winter extension. This is what I got hit with, that you need to have all your plants planted by March 1st.
So to explain that, this is a administrative discretionary thing that we do. So when we get complaints late in the summer season for landscaping, we know that there's no way that if we get a complaint in August, there's no way that someone's going to get it done before the snow flies. So we will grant an extension to the following spring to say you need to get it done by then in order to be in compliance. So it's an administrative provision that we do on a discretionary basis because people fall into the situation all the time. One of the things that we also do with code enforcement, especially for landscaping, and landscaping, just to clarify, is if you have over 25% of your front yard is covered in weeds, you need to fix it. If it's over 50%, you got to redo it, okay? So it's a substantial threshold, but what ends up happening is we go and hit those in April and May to give time for at least 3 extensions, so you get basically 90 days before we issue a summons into court. And that helps the process. But when we get a violation, or we go out and see something where we have to address it, say in August or September, we give winter extensions for that.
Yeah.
And it's also for dead trees and things also of other natures.
So that's just my anecdotal thing, is that Colorado weather doesn't really permit for a lot of that. Right. Are there any key considerations or aspects that have been overlooked? I think It's so interesting, and I know we've talked about this of just like code in Colorado with our strong libertarian streak as a culture in our state. And so I think there is a lot of like, I pay my taxes, I pay my mortgage, like get off my back kind of situation. And so I think like the approach of, I think the discussion we're having around communications is a really good one around like, you know, because I also think that there is an interesting dynamic too around culture and then like home ownership. And so like it's nice to see like, okay, if you are an owner, like how does that like if you own a property, you're a renter, it might not be in your lease agreement to maintain the property, right? Because it's not yours. And so I do think like, and there has just been a bubbling of, oh, renters are bad. I don't think like that is a conversation I really want to have in this city because a lot of people just flat out cannot afford homes, right? So I think like, how do we have this narrative or like shift that conversation around just like further from a perspective, like criminalizing poverty and like people who can't afford to buy their home or like renters are bad versus like, okay, you're a property owner, you own X amount of properties in North Glen or you don't even live here. Like, how do we get those people to care about our community and like take care of their property? Because, you know, I know I have a couple of people in my ward who, you know, own homes, don't really maintain them, and I know they don't live here. You know, so it's like, whose fault is that? Like, you know, the people who live in the house suffer, the neighborhood suffers, the person who owns the home is kind of like just dancing around. I don't know if they're dancing, but I've just been thinking about that a lot and with other conversations that we've been having around like, and the idea of like beautifying North Glen and sort of like, what does that actually mean in like today, in 2025, you know? And I think too, I would love to think forward with economic changes on the horizon and sort of like, what does that mean for our residents and like, what does that mean for us as a city and what does that look like? I don't know, that was a lot of rambling, but that's just sort of like where my head's been at this point.
Councilmember Goff?
Thank you, Director Svoboda. So a couple of things that come to my mind is that I'm really glad to see that residents sort of weaponizing code against their neighbors seems to be dropping. And I'm again, crew is wonderful, and I'm so glad that we dedicated budget and resources to maintaining the crisis response unit. I'm also really happy to see that we have something like 97% compliance. I mean, we don't want to forget that. I mean, that means people really are trying to do their best, and in many cases they can. The other thing I would just say, there's a couple of responses. There is the libertarian spirit, you know, I should be able to do whatever I want, it's my property. But then there's also, I also hear a lot of times from, and it's mostly like older retired people who have the time to maintain their yards and they have these beautifully manicured yards. But there is, you know, like a need or a complaint that people aren't being good neighbors. Like they don't know their neighbors, they aren't having pride in their community and that kind of thing. So I don't know how, maybe there is more communication we could do. I know we give good neighbor awards and good yard, you know, beautiful yard awards, but maybe we could do some more communication about what it means to be a good neighbor. And I just always want to go back to, as being a teacher, first parent conference of the year, the first parent comes in, you give my kid too much homework. The next one comes in, you don't give my kid enough homework. And so it's kind of like what you were saying. There's no way you're going to, you know, make it so that everyone will be happy.
So if I may, a couple quick things. One of the things that came out of code enforcement 5-6 years ago, just before COVID, is that we brought forward the idea of the block party trailer to address that issue, because that's a comment we've heard for years from council, is our neighbors don't know each other, and utilizing it as a tool and a resource. The other thing that we had talked about long ago was neighborhood cleanups. And what we ended up with is dumpster days. But with that, we also have a program where if 5 or more residents fill out a form, you can have a dumpster delivered to your block for free. So we have all of these types of things. And I will honestly say that dumpster days, man, that makes our job way easier because people clean up. It's not as bad as it once was. I mean, there at one point, the Village Greens neighborhood, we had, I think one summer, we had one officer working full-time just in that neighborhood because of how bad it was. And you just couldn't get it. There's just, I mean, it was so bad that we just literally had an officer dedicated for 3 months just doing nothing but that area. So all of that has kind of changed over time. But to your point, we really do try to emphasize those types of programs as well to help address that. One other thing that I forgot to mention earlier that you reminded me of is, so, you know, we had 2,900 cases last year. And when you think about, we have 9,600 single-family homes, and we have about 15 multifamily properties, and then we have the commercial businesses. We're literally touching almost a quarter of every resident every year statistically. That's not insignificant. And to the libertarian paradigm here is that historically we've been one of the more aggressive communities in terms of this. And I think because of the high expectation that council has set, we really are trying to strike that balance between all of this in our approach of how we get compliance. And I think that's a tough narrative to sell, especially when you're at a ward, when you have your ward meeting. It's like, we're really trying to find this balance because you do have these, you know, very divergent views on what community is. And, you know, by and large, when you get the really wound up folks, I moved here because there's no HOA.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like cornerstone to a lot of the folks who get really frustrated.
That's true.
So.
Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, Brooke, I think you were asking, if I heard you correctly, you know, what was it that we as council were thinking when we wanted to put the strat code enforcement on the strat plan? So I did go back to the Padlet, and there are 2 item entries, actually one from you, Jay, which says enforce the codes. So maybe you could speak to that. But, you know, certainly, for example, for Adam, who is not here, what he wrote is, I like focusing on sweeps idea. Some of the residents I talk with, this seems to be their #1 complaint to me. Let's push to inform the community, which is kind of where I'm at. I think we need to have a PR sort of campaign to say, hey, look, you know, we are expecting high standards, but we're working on getting there. I'll just finish what he wrote here. Let's push to inform the community as well so that they can have the opportunity to get their yards in shape. So that was one thing. And then just a few snippets from Councilmember Walker, since he's not here. You know, his main issues were abandoned expired tags, fire hydrants, stop sign parkers, although it seems like that's more of an overlap with police department related,
Sure.
not necessarily code.
So
anyway, I'd encourage you to go back to the Padlet if you can access that. And
sure. I think where I prompted council was, what are the metrics for success from your perspective? Because here's the thing. What we did in response to those items is that code enforcement, winter season is our slow time. We are assisting right now with the police department, and we are writing tickets for vehicles from basically 30 days to a year. They get a ticket. That's not in this data. If it's a vehicle that's over a year, it gets towed. Code enforcement staff, this is not police data staff, is that we've done over 500 tickets and or tows since mid-December. So that's our response to those Padlet items. We're addressing that because it's obviously a concern of interest that has elevated to the council level, and so we are responding and reacting. I think the one thing that we are not is intractable and saying we're not going to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to say, what are the emergency priorities and how can we remain flexible to that? So I will say that the only thing that I give pause to is sweeps. is that I think if we have a known issue where we have something that we want to address, like the abandoned vehicles, and here's the thing, we don't touch the public right away. That's kind of like where this was done long before Brook. But it's not to say that we can't. And so that's what we're doing. I think it's as things arise, we can address. And I think that's one of the other things that we can also work on in terms of a messaging.
Yeah, actually, based off of the history that you gave earlier this evening, some of the remarks were talking about sweeps. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I think those people that, myself included, that wrote a remark about doing sweeps, we get it now.
Yeah.
That was probably not a good move. But in terms of putting metrics, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I'd hate to like do a customer survey, satisfaction survey on an organization that is more or less out there to kind of enforce the rules. I don't know.
I will throw a couple of things out. So if you are in CRM, I don't statistically track it because it hasn't been something that rises to concern, but people fill out surveys. These are the folks that made the complaint. It's well over 85, 90% are positive, and when positive feedback. Yeah. Yeah, on our CRMs that we're doing, that, met standard, did a good job, blah, blah, blah. The ones that we don't, I review every single one that comes in. If there's a question, I was like, it doesn't sound right. What's going on here? I look up the case and then I follow up, and either through the supervisor or the admin, we reach out to that person and find out what happened, what's going wrong, what went wrong. So we do that as well. So we really do try to work all ends of that, but I didn't provide that data because, one, not everybody fills out a CRM survey response to do that. But, moreover, I think to think about in context, if we're doing 2,500 to 3,000 violations a day, how many, or a year, how many of those are you hearing about as an elected official? And is that a measure to think about in terms of, how significant a situation is? In terms of where does it sit in the priority of you as a council member dealing with the public?
I'll just share anecdotally, I think in the last 12 months, year to date, I've only had maybe 3 or 4 conversations that have been code related. I just offer that out there.
Councilmember Jaramillo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Director Svoboda. I love that you are doing abatement assistant with the crisis response unit because some of the, littering on private property is, I feel, elevated to hoarding, and that might be another way to look at it. We have so many littering violations. It's like, okay, where does it elevate into something completely different? And I'm sure there's situations in every ward, but we've had some quite like on the radar.
We do. Yeah, we do. I think, that's why we have the address of chronic violators or reoccurring nuisances. So that's one where we elevate. One other thing I also want to mention that I don't want to, I almost forgot, I bet one of you two are going to jump in, is as the other part of the strategic plan is for us to develop a maintenance care program for assistance for those folks who can't afford to help take care of their properties. I actually met with the comms staff today to talk about the preliminary process of how we might roll that out. So we are on that front, working toward that. I will say that on the hoarder situation, we do have known folks and we are looking at that. I know there's a couple just literally down the street from me that we are working right now. I do want to point out, and just maybe more for the public edification on this, is that one of the biggest challenges we have is behind the fence. And if a resident isn't really willing to, an adjacent property owner isn't willing to let us into their backyard to observe the violation, it's a Fourth Amendment protected issue. And I know that, I believe it was recently, we had an individual who got written up for a violation, and their comment was, "Why aren't you addressing the hoarder down the street?" And we said, well, that's because the neighbors next door will not give consent to be a witness because they don't want, it's the live and let live. They don't want to, and this person's like, well, you should just be able to go in their backyard and do your job. And we're like, it's a Fourth Amendment protected right, we can't do that. So that's part of that whole process. That person's still not satisfied that we're doing our job correctly, but we at least gave them the information so that they understand why.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to know if those are the people that are the 1.5 to 2.5% that are non-compliant, you know, like, is there correlation between, you know, that unsuccess rate compared to those certain situations?
Sure. I need to go back. I could go back and like go through the last 2 years of cases. My gut and my anecdotal memory of this, which I don't trust, is it's like a 50-50 split of hardship versus, man, I don't care. Just do what you think you're going to do, and I'll take it to the judge. You got that. It's like there's no gray. It's either we're in financial challenges, you know, loss of family member, challenge, you know, don't have the financial means right now. How can we do this? It's a real challenge. And I will say the other backside to this, which is yet again another variable to all this, we go in and we abate the property and then we lien it. And then the people who complain go, that looks like crap. It looks awful. And we're like, but it meets the code. And we're not going to go put in Kentucky bluegrass on there because it's expensive, because we're trying to be mindful that we don't want to further in a bad situation go, we're going to do a premium you know, landscape job when really we just need to make it not look bad. So.
Cool, thank you.
Councilmember Burns.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think to think about your other question, Director Svoboda, of like, what is a metric for success? Like, what does this kind of look like? I've been thinking, and I know these are not going to be tangible, so just like roll with me for a minute.
Sure.
But to me, like, I think about this a lot. Like, one of my first council meetings when I got appointed was about xeriscaping and what does that look like? And your team had brought forth standards based on Boulder. I didn't say anything at the time, thinking about it a lot. Like, our economic profile of our city is vastly different from Boulder. And so I would like, and I guess a metric of success for me is to ground ourselves in that we are a working class community. And what does that look like? Like, not everyone's going to have pristine yards, or like things might take a couple of seasons or cycles for people to get the things to get their dream house, right? And so to me, I think like regrounding in that aspect, because when you say too that we have a much higher rate than surrounding cities, like I think about that a lot too, because I don't think we are socioeconomically very different from our surrounding cities. But yeah. So I think about that a lot, of just like, what does that, from a measure of success, look like? Of like, okay, are people maintaining, you know what I mean? Like, because I don't know, and I know you can't measure these things, so I am very sorry about that. But I've been thinking about that a lot, and just as our community is changing and shifting and diversifying, like, what does all of that look like from this, you know, and the climate is changing, so like this manicured green lawn, white picket fence, like that doesn't exist anymore, and a lot of people don't want that. So I just think like, what does, so like from you know, a clean street, like, and like when people don't know their neighbors, kind of like community, like I think a lot about too of our value of this, like, you know, small town feel, like how do we sort of like bring all of that into this? Because I do think the neighbor on neighbor crime can put tensions there and that sort of thing. And maybe you don't want to know your community then. But yeah, but from like a measurement of success, I guess it's like, and this is not, again, like, I think this is maybe like the broken windows theory of just like, do we have a safe, comfortable community for all of our residents, which I think is like one of our overarching goals. And so to me, like, then code ladders into that, I guess. That was a lot of words, and I know nothing is measurable from that. But just for my fellow DIAS members, I think that's just where I'm thinking of like, how can code be successful? And like, to me, it's like, I don't think necessarily the most amount of tickets or the most amount of whatever necessarily measures success versus like but I do hear you in that like healthy balance of like, you're not doing enough and you're doing way too much. So, and maybe we are hitting that. So I don't know. So maybe that is the success rate. Are we getting the equal amount of complaints? I don't know.
If I may, Councilmember Burns, a couple of really, you bring up some really good points. I think our staff, that's the mindfulness that they go out with, okay? They recognize the community and who they are and what they're dealing with. And interestingly, you know, we're transitioning into paper performance, okay? And I actually had to do like a half-day retreat with them because their mindset went to the only way you're going to value my success is by how many cases I write. And we had to sit down and go through our measures of metrics for our evaluation process against what they already see themselves doing. And what it really did is it gave them a reflection of going, this is where my value is. My value is how I serve the community, not how many cases I have on paper. And so we've really helped try to promulgate that mindset for our staff. And this is something that they've self-directed themselves to do. So it's a very difficult and tangible, but I will say it is really an integral part of what we are promoting with myself and Supervisor Carlson for the staff so that they feel more empowered to be that person. And I can tell you that the abandoned vehicles has rubbed a lot of them the wrong way because they're like, this is not what we're here to do. We're here to help. And I think, you know, it's been one of those parts where it's like, look, I get it, but you know what? This is a priority. We need to address it. Let's turn the volume down, make it more manageable, get through it so that we can then go back and focus on what we do best.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so nice to hear. And it's very comforting. I don't know if comfort, I don't know. It makes me feel comfortable. I won't speak for everyone. That hearing staff and departments like sort of taking our values to heart as a council. I really appreciate that. So thank you.
I agree. I like that story about you and your staff. When I go back to the question of are we prioritizing the right things, am I assuming that tier 1 is a priority?
So tier 1 and tier 2 are what we call proactives. Okay. So these are the ones that we go out and if we see it, we're hitting it. The tier 3 is really what I would say is more complaint based, or if we go out and there's a tier 1, tier 2, and we see a tier 3, we'll write it up. But we're not actively enforcing the tier 3. So in that question, the way to look at it is, would you want to pull anything up from 3 to do that? Tier 4 is all interdepartmental coordination. So it's like, you know, a multifamily doesn't put their backflow preventer into be state compliance, and so we come in and we issue them the summons on behalf of the Public Works Department, that type of stuff.
Well, I was looking because public nuisance and life safety as a joined category was curious to me because I feel like they're different in some cases. And then there is some overlap with the police department on quite a few of these. Is that just kind of nuanced? Is there a direct plan?
So this applies to private property.
Okay.
And so I can't think, unless it's a police assist where we have a hostile situation, PD does not help with these violations. Now, they may address these violations in the public right-of-way, in parks, in those areas, but these are primarily on private property.
So the one I was thinking of is the noise disturbance because we have a noise ordinance.
Yep.
And so a big rock band in your backyard.
They're going to handle that.
They are.
Yes.
And why is that?
Usually it's outside of our hours of operation, but if it's within our hours of operation, we will go out and address it. Normally where we get noise violations is on construction jobs where they're allowed to operate between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. And so if we get complaints that they're starting at 6 a.m., we will go handle that as opposed to PD. But yeah, if you have a raucous party or something, that's going to be PD's going to respond to that.
Okay. Diesel trucks
Mm-hmm.
being allowed as a noise ordinance. I mean, that is an example where the crew team and Jessica are doing a great job of trying to support with some of these questions, but that, I mean.
So give me some more.
And Carl's Farm, they just absolutely did not, they don't love this diesel truck that pulls in late at night and leaves in the morning.
Okay.
And so he fires it up
Yep.
to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my best, but the resident swears that there's a noise ordinance and we're not upholding it.
Yes, and so the noise provision itself is, I would argue, a very subjective provision. I don't believe, and I can go back and double check, but I don't even think we have a decibel standard on it. I think it's what is morally or easily definable as an offensive sound.
Okay.
I can tell you that historically, I've dealt with noise ordinances in mountain towns. It's a difficult thing to enforce because sometimes your ambient noise level can be louder than what the decibel standard is that you have. And so that's why you could argue that it's a general nuisance issue rather than just a noise violation. The other part that we look at, and this is something that people do not like to hear, can we win in court?
Oh, okay.
Because that's our other filter that we take on a lot of these types of cases, is if we take it to the judge or the prosecuting attorney, is the prosecuting attorney going to say, yes, this is valid and I will take it to the judge and go to bat? Or it's like, this is going to get thrown out. We are sensitive to that because if we get something thrown out and we bring it back again and we have the same judge time and more, they're like, what are you doing? Why does this keep coming back? This is not something you can bring to me. You're wasting my time. And we really try to measure that because we don't want to find ourselves in that type of situation.
There's just so many things. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will keep it brief because I think everybody said a lot of the same thoughts that I have, so I appreciate all of those comments. I just want to say personally, I have noticed in Ward 4 a decrease in a lot of those neighbor-on-neighbor complaints. For what that's worth, for whatever the reasons might be, I don't know, but there used to be a few that were pretty serious and ongoing constantly. And hopefully I just haven't jinxed it, but I have not heard anything. I don't even want to say that. So, I mean, that's good news. And I hope that part of that is that relationship with crew that wasn't there before. So I am very, very appreciative of the work and the collaboration that's happening. And also with PD on the vehicle enforcement, because that is one thing that has come up more than anything else in Ward 4 with some serious vehicles that are years expired, per Councilmember Burns' thought process there. So I appreciate that, and I do see a difference. So do I think that all the steps that have been taken and the council feedback that you've taken are working? I do see that, just from what I can tell as a council representative of Ward 4. So for what that's worth, I just wanted to say that I appreciate that, and I appreciate that collaboration, and also that care that you take and what everybody's situation is. I completely forgot about if you have 5 or more people, you can get a dumpster delivered for free. So I'm like, okay, next ward meeting, make sure, let residents know that to kind of foster that, neighbor collaboration. The block party trailers, all of those are good things for us, I think, to make sure we keep saying and emphasizing in ward meetings, and and code enforcement does involve knowing your neighbors and maybe trying to help out if you can. It doesn't always work out. So thank you for that. And I was told my granddaughter is watching, so hi Tatum, and that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you for that, and I know staff will greatly appreciate that.
So I don't know if we sent you off with good information. I think we had a lot of questions, a lot of comments. When I go back to what should we change, I mean, I'm assuming there was some thought in developing these tiers. The only one I did wonder about is the abandonment of a vehicle on private property is
Yep.
tier 3.
So what that is you go over to your neighbor's house, park your car, and you just decide, I'm just going to leave it. That's what that provision is covering. It's covering when someone leaves a vehicle on private property that is not that person's vehicle, that we have the ability to go and take enforcement against that. Where we deal with this most is on commercial property. So a vehicle, someone parks a vehicle in a parking lot, it's not going away. One of the things that we've worked with, and this has been over the years, is that with almost every retail center we have, is we encourage them to post our municipal regulation, because then it gives us the ability to go inside it and hook it and tow it. So
Okay.
that's the distinction. Yeah.
Okay, so then
But-
the other one must be the one that PD has been chasing down, where they're stealing cars and dropping them in the apartment complex?
We work on that as well. What we also look at is that with abandoned vehicles, there's two types. There's inoperable, and then there's the ones that are not properly tagged. And so if we can visually inspect that from the street or from the public right of way and identify in the front yard, either one of those two, that the plates aren't current, we can write them up. It is a different time schedule for on private property than it is for on the street. On the street, we have more discretion on how we can enforce.
Okay, well, I don't know that anybody had any earth-shattering suggestions. Where would you like to go from
Well,
here?
if I may, the one takeaway I'm hearing is that it's not broken.
Right.
I think the other takeaway is that what can we do better to communicate? I think the other part of this is really kind of getting the opportunity to share with council what our approach is and how we, on a staff level, do our best with our intention on how we work with the community on this. And, hopefully with this session tonight, that's a takeaway that people can reflect on. Some people go, hell no, that's not right. They're not going to agree with that. But I think, that's where we work hard to try to find success. And, that's where we try to challenge us as a team to say, how can we do better? So, we are not perfect. We have guys who have bad days. That's what happens. But I think by and large, they know that myself and Supervisor Carlson support them, and I know that they feel the support from council as well, so they don't feel like they're just standing out there on their own. And I think that's really integral to their success. So I just wanted to share that because I think what I'm hearing from you is there's nothing that's counter to that narrative, and I think we can still work better on some aspects. And I think as things emerge, this is not a one and done. We can revisit this if there's something that comes up that's important.
Okay. Councilmember Burns.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a thought from my marketing side of my brain. One of the things I've loved about this community and really wanted to make me get involved was when we bought our house, we got like a welcome package in the mail. So maybe something that we could do is have like a little like to-do list or codes, like common things that happen for first-time home buyers who don't know. And like, I'm just like, was an idiot. And so it's like, how do you like, maybe there's something that we can put in that packet already that exists, that it's just like a checklist for people of like things to think about or something like that.
I think we might already, I don't know, it's been a minute.
We'll double check. I thought
Yeah.
we had something.
Yeah.
But we can always make it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't remember it exactly, but
I thought at one point, if it wasn't in the welcome packet, we were doing like a media push of like, hey, if you're a new homeowner, it's like, because I can tell you anecdotally, and this is not that, people are stupid, but like we would write people up for tall weeds and grass, and they'd have a weed whacker mowing their lawn.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I didn't realize I had to buy a mower. And you're like, okay, yep, learning
Yeah.
curve, so
Because then it's like,
it
oh,
does
like,
happen.
the electric like mower program, like all
Yeah.
those things that we do offer for folks, I think would be cool. Or like the dumpster thing, just like things like that. Because I was already designing a little graphic for my neighbors because we had one of the storms, one of our trees in the backyard split. And so we have a branch now that we need to get rid of that I'm not putting in the car to drive up to. I mean, no offense.
Don't blame you.
Yeah. And so it's like I was designing a flyer to put in my neighbors, be like, hey, who wants to do this? It's so fun, kind of thing. So I can get rid of my branch. But I think just like things like that to like also like help build community for new folks who get in, I think might be kind of cool, or just something.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Super brief. I love that idea, and I will say you brought up a memory from 10 years ago when I moved here. I got tagged on my trash cans because they weren't a certain distance. I'm like, I didn't know how far apart to put them. And it wasn't a great first impression, but here I am. I love the city. So I agree. I think little things like that are important. That's all I'm going to say. And now I know how to do
Okay,
it.
I can't resist because I have to say, trash cans in this community is unlike anywhere else in the world, okay? And it was one of the things when I first got here, I was like, what is going on? I mean, like, we would have people, like, we know when the vehicles go, when the trucks go pick up the trash, right? Not 20 minutes after the truck would go by, people would be calling on their neighbors saying their trash can is out. Like, we had to go and say, it has to be so many hours after. That's how crazy trash cans are. So I couldn't help resist. I had to say something. It's just unlike anywhere else. It's crazy.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it. All right. Any other items for council? No. Okay. Well, we're adjourned. Have a great evening.